I've been running these old Appalachian highways for more than 20 years now, hauling everything from lumber to machinery through the twists and turns of West Virginia's backcountry. My name's Harlan Whitaker, but folks on the road know me as Whit, a nickname that stuck from a daddy calling me that when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. The Whitaker name goes back generations in these hills, tracing roots to Scottish-Irish settlers who carved out lives from the stubborn rock and tangled woods. I grew up in a narrow hollow just outside Raynell, where the Greenbrier River winds like a lazy serpent, its waters cold and clear in summer, murky and swollen after storms. The mountains loomed over everything, their peaks shrouded in mist most mornings, like they were keeping secrets from the valley below. Daddy was a logger through and through, rising before dawn to head into the forests with his crew, felling massive white oaks and yellow poplars that had stood for centuries. He'd come home smelling of sawdust and sweat, his hands calloused like leather, telling stories of close calls, trees that fell wrong, axes that slipped. But one day when I was 10, a chainsaw bucked on a knotty trunk, slicing clean through his thigh. Doctor saved the leg, but it was never the same, twisted and weak, leaving him hobbling on a cane, bitter as moonshine gone sour. He took to sitting on the porch of our weathered trailer, nursing bottles of cheap whiskey, staring at the ridges as if they owed him something. Mama, bless her, kept us afloat working double shifts at the Blue Jay Diner in town, slinging plates of biscuits and gravy to truckers and locals alike. She'd come home bone-tired, her apron stained with coffee and grease, but she always had time to gather us kids around the kitchen table for supper. "These woods ain't forgiving, Harlan," she'd warn, her eyes shadowed with the weight of too many disappearances she'd heard about, hikers lost in the laurels, hunters vanishing without a trace. "Stay on the pass, here? They swallow folks whole if you stray." Her voice carried the lilt to the heels, soft but firm, laced with fear born from generations of stories passed down like heirlooms. I heeded her enough to make it through my teen years without getting into too much trouble, but the call of the open road was stronger than caution. After high school, where I barely scraped by with C's in shop class and history, I saved up for my commercial driver's license and hit the highways, figuring anything was better than choking all sawdust or coal dust like my kin. The truth is, these mountains don't let you go easy. They pull you back, weave into your dreams and waking thoughts, making you part of their endless cycle of growth and decay. I felt it on long hauls, when the ridges seem to breathe, the trees whispering as the wind shifts through them. Nights are my domain now. The pay's double for overnight runs, and there's a peace in the emptiness. No tourists clogging the lanes with their RVs, no commuters honking in frustration. But it's a double-edged blade. The dark brings isolation that gnaws at you, turns your mind inward to regrets and what-ifs. My marriage to Sarah crumbled under that weight. We met at a county fair in Lewisburg, her with her bright smile and freckles, me awkward in my best flannel. We married young, had Ellie a year later, a spitfire with my eyes and her mama's laugh. But the road called louder than family dinners, and Sarah grew tired of the empty chair at the table, the birthdays missed, the nights alone wondering if I'd wrapped Betsy around a tree in some foggy hollow. "You're a ghost already, Harlan," she said the day she packed up, tears streaking her face as Ellie clung to her leg. "Might as well haunt these roads full time." I don't blame her one bit. Ohio offered stability, a 9-to-5 guy who was there for soccer games and school plays. Ellie's grown now, 16 last month, sending me texts with emojis I don't understand, and photos of her with braces off, grinning wide. The road's my family these days. A Kenworth W900 I call Betsy, after my granny who raised chickens and told fortunes from tea leaves. She's a beast, with a Cummins engine that purrs like a contented cat on straightaways, a sleeper cab kitted out with a narrow bunk I crash in at rest stops, a mini fridge humming with Mountain Dews and ham sandwiches, and a dashboard altar of faded snapshots. Ellie at 6, gap-toothed and joyful on her bike. Sarah on her wedding day, veil fluttering in the breeze, before the miles etched lines on our faces. Every run starts ritualistic. Inspect the load straps, top off the diesel, check tire pressure, then ease into the night, praying for clear skies and no surprises. That particular evening in late fall clung to the air like a promise of winter's bite. The leaves had peaked weeks ago, now a carpet of crimson and amber along the shoulders of Route 19, crunching under boots if you stepped out.
I'd hooked up the trailer in a warehouse yard in Charleston, the air thick with the resinous scent of fresh-cut pine 2x4s, stacked neat and high, bound for a lumber mill up in Pittsburgh where they'd be turned into homes or furniture for folks who never saw the trees standing tall. The sky hung low, clouds bruised with the threat of rain that never fully committed, just a fine mist that beaded on the windshield. I pulled into my go-to spot, the Ridge Runner truck stop, perched on the edge of the interstate before 19 veered into the Rio Mountain meet. The lot buzzed with activity, rigs of all makes idling, their exhaust curling like ghosts in the cooling air, drivers in ball caps and hoodies milling about, stretching cramped legs or swapping lies over cigarettes. I maneuvered Betsy into a slot under the harsh sodium lamps, their orange hum casting everything in a sickly glow, like the world was jaundiced. Hopping down from the cab, the gravel crunched under my boots, and I zipped my jacket against the chill that nipped at my ears. Inside the diner, the warmth hit like a hug, smells of frying bacon, burnt toast, and that eternal pot of coffee percolating. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating former counters scarred from years of elbows and spilled sugar. Mabel was behind the register, her stout frame wrapped in a floral apron, a faded rose tattoo peeking from her sleeve, a remnant from her wilder days, she joked. Her laugh was legendary, sharp and booming, cutting through the din of clinking silverware and murmured conversations. "Evening, Whit," she greeted, already twisting the cap on my thermos and filling it with black coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "You look like you could use a jolt. Rough day?" I shrugged, fishing out cash for the coffee, a fresh pack of Marlboros, and a stick of peppered beef jerky for the munchies later. "Same as always, Mabel, hauling wood north. Do you hear anything about the weather?" She nodded, her graying bun bobbing as she rang me up. "Fog's rolling in thick, darling. Stady shut down a chunk near Summersville last week after a nasty pileup. Semi-jackknifed in the soup. Took 3 cars with it." Her words landed heavy, stirring that uneasy churn in my gut. I'd seen enough wrecks to know how quick things turn deadly out here. Mabel leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "And watch for drifters. Fella came through earlier. Trucker like you said he spotted someone trudging the median up yonder. No coat, no sense. These hills chew up fools and spit 'em out." I forced a chuckle, but it rang hollow, not reaching my eyes. Mabel had ears for every whisper on the road, tales of breakdowns, bad fuel, and the stranger stuff that truckers only admit after a few beers, like lights in the woods or voices on dead radios. Outside, the cold had deepened, my breath pluming white as I climbed back into Betsy's cab, the seat creaking familiar under my weight. I cranked the engine, the diesel thundering awake, vibrations rumbling through the steering wheel. A quick glance in the mirrors, left, right, rear. Nothing amiss, just the lot's lights fading as I eased onto the ramp. Merging onto 19, the highway slimmed to 2 lanes, the forest crowding in like curious spectators, branches reaching over the blacktop. The initial stretch lulled me into complacency, the kind of easy driving that lets your mind wander. The sun had surrendered fully, dipping behind the western ridges and leaving a twilight canvas streaked in purples and indigos that bled to black. My headlights sliced the gloom, illuminating faded yellow lines, occasional potholes patched with tar, and the blur of guardrails bent from past mishaps. A possum waddled across, its eyes flashing red in the beams before vanishing into the brush. The fog began subtle, tendrils snaking up from the creek beds that paralleled the road, ghostly fingers probing the asphalt. It built gradual, from wisps to patches that the high beams struggled against, so I flicked on the fog lamps, their amber light piercing better through the haze. The radio provided company, dialed to WKOY out of Beckley, spinning classic country. Patsy Cline's haunting crazy filling the cab, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, stirring memories of Sarah singing along on our early dates. But as the elevation climbed, the signal weakened, static hissing in like unwanted static, distorting the melody until it was unrecognizable. I spun the knob, landing on a late-night talk show, some gravel-voiced host fielding calls about conspiracies in the national forests. "It's the wild man out there," a caller ranted, his accent thick as sorghum. "Pharaoh folks living off the land, stealing from campsites, dragging people into the woods. Government knows, but they cover it up." The host chuckled dismissively, but the words lingered, prickling my skin. I switched to the CB radio, channel 19, the trucker's lifeline. "Breaker 19, this is Whit, northbound on 19. Anyone got ears on? How's the bear situation?" A crackle, then Tommy's familiar drawl from Ohio. "Copy that, Whit. Road's getting slick ahead, fog thicker than my ex's lies. No bear spotted, but watch your 6. Heard some chatter about debris from a slide." Tommy was a solid guy, hauled reefer loads cross-country. We shared coffee at stops, traded tips on routes. We jawed for a bit, my lumber haul, his frozen goods, the eternal gripes about fuel prices, before the signal faded as I plunged into a rock cut, the walls rising sheer on both sides, blocking everything. Silence descended, broken only by the engine's steady drone and the tires humming on pavement. The cab felt bigger yet tighter, the green glow from the gauges casting eerie shadows on my knuckles. I took a pull from the thermos, the coffee scalding and bitter, jolted me sharper. Thoughts turned to Ellie, 15 going on 30, probably buried in her phone, texting friends about school drama. Sarah emailed pics occasionally, Ellie with her hair dyed blue, piercing in her nose, looking more like a stranger each time. The road stretches everything, time, relationships, until they fray and snap, leaving you with echoes. It was pushing 9 when the figure first appeared, materializing like a bad dream at the edge of my lights. The road had twisted into a wooded section, trees pressing close, their bare limbs interlacing above like a skeletal canopy, filtering what little moonlight pierced the clouds. The fog had thickened here, clinging low to the ground in swirling eddies stirred by Betsy's draft. My high beam snagged on something anomalous on the right shoulder, a tall, unmoving silhouette, humanoid but rigid as a scarecrow. I tapped the brakes gently, the rig slowing with a hiss of air, and leaned forward, peering through the streaked glass as the wipers thumped rhythmic. Hitchhiker, my brain supplied first. Plenty of them on these rural byways, folks with busted cars or no money for buses, thumbing for mercy from passers-by. I've picked up a few over the years, a miner headed home after a shift, a young couple eloping to Pittsburgh, even a vet with stories that kept me awake. But as I closed the distance, details emerged from the murk, and doubt crept in. He, and it had to be a man from the broad shoulders and stance, was clad in...
I remember that night like it was etched into the back of my eyelids. The kind of memory that surfaces unbidden when the road gets quiet and the dark presses in. My name's Harlan, and I've been hauling freight up and down these Appalachian highways for near on 20 years now. Started out young, right out of high school in a little hollow town called Grundy, Virginia, where the coal mines swallow men whole and spit out their bones. Trucking seemed like a way out. Steady pay, open road, no boss breathing down your neck except the clock and the weather. But these mountains, they have a way of pulling you back, wrapping their foggy arms around you until you can't tell where the asphalt ends and the wilderness begins. I drive for an outfit out of Roanoke, mostly refrigerated loads, produce, dairy, whatever needs to stay cold from one depot to the next. That run from Roanoke up I-81 to Harrisburg was one of my regulars, a solid 8 hours if the traffic behaved and the passes weren't iced over. Early spring, though, that's when things get tricky. The thaws bring mudslides and the storms whip through the valleys like angry spirits chasing each other. That particular night, it was March, I think. Yeah, March 15th, the Ides or whatever they call it. I'd loaded up just after dusk, the warehouse boys joking about the forecast, saying it'd be a soaker. I waved him off, climbed into my rig, a blue Kenworth with over 500,000 miles on her, and hit the interstate. The first hour was fine, just the usual hum of the diesel engine vibrating through the seat, the glow of the dash lights casting shadows on my hands. I had a thermos of black coffee, strong enough to strip paint, and a pack of Marlboros for company. The radio was tuned to some country station out of Bristol, playing old Johnny Cash tunes that fit the mood. Folsom Prison Blues was on when the rain started, soft at first, then building to a roar against the cab roof. Wipers going full tilt, slapping back and forth like they were trying to fight off the deluge. The Shenandoah Valley stretched out ahead, those ancient ridges rising up on either side, black silhouettes against a sky that had gone mean. The CB was crackling with the usual chatter at first, other truckers griping about the weather, sharing tips on detours. "Breaker 19, this is Rubber Duck, got a bear in the bushes at mile marker 210, someone said, warning about a speed trap. I keyed up once or twice just to check in, but as the storm thickened, the voices faded. Static took over, that white noise that makes you feel like you're the last man on earth. I didn't mind the solitude much. It's part of the job. Gives you time to think or not think, depending on what demons you're running from. Me, I had a few. My old man died in a mine collapse when I was 12, left my mom to raise me and my sister on welfare and odd jobs. I married young to a girl from over in Wytheville, but that fell apart after a few years. Too much time on the road, too many nights alone for her. We had a kid, a boy named Tommy, but he lives with her now up in Pennsylvania. I send checks, call when I can, but it's not the same. These runs to Harrisburg give me a chance to see him sometimes, drop off a toy or take him for ice cream. That night I had a model truck in the sleeper cab, wrapped in newspaper, figuring I'd surprise him. The rain turned the highway into a slick black snake, reflections of my headlights dancing on the puddles. I kept it steady at 60, eyes peeled for deer or fallen branches. These parts, the wildlife doesn't care about your schedule. I've seen rigs totaled by a buck jumping out of the fog. About an hour north of Roanoke, just past the new market exit, the fog started creeping in.
Not the thin stuff that burns off quick. No, this was the real deal, rolling down from the Blue Ridge like a living thing. It swallowed the road ahead, turning my high beams into useless glows that bounced right back at me. I flipped to low beams, slowed to 40, then 30. The world shrunk to the few feet in front of my bumper, the white lines blurring into gray. That's when the isolation really hits you. No stars, no moon, just you and the machine, plowing through a void. I lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the cup of my hands, and cracked the window a hair to let the smoke out. The air smelled sharp, like wet pine and ozone, with that undercurrent of earth that's always there in the mountains. I was nursing my coffee when I first saw them, the taillights. Just faint red pinpricks at first, winking through the mist like distant campfires. I figured it was another rig up ahead, maybe a breakdown or someone pulled over to wait out the worst of it. In this weather, you look out for each other. Could be you next time with a blown tire or overheating engine. I eased off the gas, letting my truck coast closer, the engine growling low. As the shape emerged from the fog, it wasn't what I expected. An old semi, looked like a Freightliner from the 70s, cab-over design with a box trailer that had seen better days. Rust eaten through the fenders, paint faded to a dull green, no company logo I could make out. It was parked crooked on the shoulder, half on the gravel, half still on the pavement, like it had skidded to a stop. No hazard lights flashing, just those steady red taillights glowing dim. I scanned for plates, but the fog and rain made it impossible, maybe covered in mud or maybe gone altogether. Something about it set my nerves jangling even then. The CB was dead silent, no distress call, no nothing. I keyed up anyway. "Breaker, this is Blue Thunder on I-81 northbound, mile marker around 240. Got a rig on the shoulder here. Anybody copy? You need a hand?" Static answered, hissing like a nest of snakes. I waited a beat, then another. Nothing. All right, I thought. Maybe their radio's out or they're hurt. I've heard stories. Drivers having heart attacks at the wheel, slumping over while the truck idles. I couldn't just roll on by. That's not how we do things out here. I flicked on my four-ways, pulled over about 20 yards back, and killed the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening, just the rain drumming on the roof and the tick-tick of the cooling motor. I grabbed my mag light from the glove box, the heavy one that doubles as a club if need be, and shrugged into my yellow rain slicker. Stepped out into the downpour, boots splashing in the puddles, the cold hitting me like a slap. The air was thicker out there, heavy with that mountain dampness that clings to your skin. Pine scent strong, mixed with the acrid tang of exhaust. Wait, exhaust? If the truck was running, why no movement? I trudged forward, flashlight beam cutting through the fog, raindrops sparkling in the light like falling stars. "Hey, anybody in there?" I hollered, voice swallowed by the storm. No answer. The driver's door was cracked open, swinging a little in the wind gusts, creaking on rusty hinges. I shone the light inside the cab, empty, seats torn up, vinyl cracked and sprouting foam like it had been clawed by animals. Dashboard gauges all dark, but when I reached in and touched the steering wheel, it was warm. Hell, the whole cab felt like it had been occupied minutes ago. Engine humming faintly under the hood, a low vibration I could feel through the frame. Papers scattered on the floorboards, old manifests, yellowed with age, ink faded. I picked one up, water dripping from my sleeve. Shipment from 1974, coal tar from Pittsburgh to some mill in Lexington. Water stains blurred the signatures, but it looked real enough. What the hell? This rig should have been in a junkyard, not out here running. Unease prickled up my spine, that gut twist you get when something's off but you can't pin it. These mountains are full of relics, old logging trucks abandoned in the woods, rusted hulks from the days when these roads were gravel paths. But this one was too clean underneath the grime, like it had been preserved. I swept the light around the trailer, noting the chains dangling loose, no locks on the doors. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked back, rain soaking through my jeans now, and tugged on the handle. Locked after all. Peered through a gap, empty inside, just shadows and the smell of mold. All right, Harlan, I told myself. Drivers probably wandered off to take a leak or flag down help, but why leave the door open? And in this weather, I turned back toward the cab, and that's when I noticed the skid marks. Fresh ones, black rubber streaks veering off the shoulder, right into the guardrail. The metal was bent, fresh scrimps shining in the beam. Beyond it, the ravine dropped steep, a black maw of trees and underbrush. I leaned over, heart picking up pace, and shone the light down. There, about 30 feet below, tangled in vines and saplings, was wreckage. Twisted metal frame,
cab crumpled like a beer can, trailer split open. Overgrown, yeah, moss and leaves claiming it, but the shape, same old Freightliner, same faded green paint, even the logo, half obscured, Appalachian Freight Company. My breath caught. How? I rubbed my eyes, rain stinging them, thinking maybe the fog was playing tricks. But no, it was there, solid as sin. These hills are littered with old accidents. Drivers push too hard in bad weather, brakes fail on the downgrades, and over they go. Some wrecks never get recovered, too steep, too costly. Folks say the mountains keep their dead. I've heard tales around truck stops, late-night yarns over cold coffee, ghost rigs, echoes of crashes replaying on stormy nights, drivers seeing lights where there shouldn't be, hearing voices on the CB begging for help that never comes. I always laughed it off, chalked it up to sleep deprivation and cheap whiskey. But standing there, flashlight trembling in my grip, it didn't feel so funny. The chill deepened, seeping into my bones like the fog itself. I backed away from the edge, glancing at the truck on the shoulder, still humming, door ajar. My mind raced. Mirage? Coincidence? Two identical trucks? Nah, that didn't sit right. I hurried back to my rig, slicker flapping, boots squelching, climbed in, slammed the door, locked it for good measure. Engine roared to life, a comforting sound, and I threw it in gear, pulled out slow, tires hissing on the wet pavement, watching that old semi in the side mirror. Its taillights stayed put, fading into the mist as I picked up speed. I exhaled, shaky, lit another smoke. Just a weird night, Harlan. Get to Harrisburg, see Tommy, forget it. But the CB crackled then, static bursting loud enough to make me jump.
I've been hauling freight across these Appalachian roads for nigh on 20 years now, ever since I dropped out of community college and figured the open highway was better than staring at four walls and some dead-end job back in Harlan County. Name's Earl Jenkins, though most folks on the CB just call me Big Earl, on account of my size and the way my rig rumbles like thunder down these twisty two lanes. I've seen just about everything out here. Deer bounding across the blacktop at the last second, fog so thick it swallows your headlights whole, and once a whole family of black bears rummaging through a flipped-over pickup like it was a picnic basket. But nothing sticks in your craw quite like the quiet nights, the ones where the mountains press in close and the world feels empty except for you and whatever's lurking just beyond the beam of your lights. That particular run started like any other. It was mid-December. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how high you crank the heater in the cab. I was loaded up with coal out of Pikeville, Kentucky, bound for Cincinnati. US 23 ain't the interstate. It's a snake of a road that winds through the hills, hugging the curves of the big sandy river one minute and climbing up into the pines the next. Folks from flatter parts call it scenic, but when you're wrestling 18 wheels through ice and switchbacks, it's more like a gauntlet. Snow had started falling earlier that evening, light at first, just flurries swirling in the wind like ghosts dancing. By the time I hit the road around midnight, it was sticking in patches, turning the asphalt slick and treacherous. I checked the weather on my phone before pulling out, another storm rolling in from the west, but I figured I could beat it if I kept my speed steady and my eyes sharp. The cab was my little world that night. I had a thermos of black coffee strong enough to strip paint, a pack of Marlboros on the dash, and my old CB radio humming softly in the background. That radio's been with me through thick and thin, saved my hide more than once with warnings about wrecks up ahead or state troopers lurking in the medians. Trucker talk is its own language. Breaker breaker, what you 20, Smokies on your tail. On a busy night, it's like a party line, full of jokes, gripes, and the occasional tall tale. But as I rolled north out of Pikeville, the chatter faded quick. Maybe it was the weather keeping folks off the air, or maybe it was just one of those nights where the signal bounces funny off the ridges. Either way, by 1 a.m. it was silent as a grave, just the low drone of my engine and the occasional hiss of tires on wet pavement.
The mountains here are old, older than time itself, or so the old-timers say. They rise up sharp and jagged, covered in a thick blanket of evergreens that look black as pitch in the dark. Every now and then you pass a holler, a narrow valley cutting into the hillside, maybe with a few shotgun shacks clustered at the bottom, lights flickering like distant stars. But mostly, it's just you and the road, the guardrails chewed up from years of rock slides and the occasional runaway rig. I've heard stories from other drivers about these parts, whispers and truck stops about feral folk living deep in the woods, descendants of miners who went mad from the isolation and never came back, or the legends of the holler haunts, spirits of those lost in the mines or drowned in flash floods, calling out in the night. I never put much stock in that stuff, superstitions for folks who ain't got enough real worries. But on nights like this, with the snow muffling everything, your mind starts to wander. I was about an hour out, crossing into the stretch where the road dips down toward the Ohio border, when the first overpass came into view. It was an old one, built back in the WPA days, I reckon. Rusted steel girders arching over a deep gorge that drops away into nothingness. The sign said Ravens Gap Bridge, though the paint was peeling and half the letters were gone. Snow was piling up on the shoulders, and I eased off the gas as I approached, feeling the trailer shift a bit on the ice. That's when the CB crackled. It wasn't much at first, just a burst of static, like someone keying the mic without saying a word. I glanced down at the unit, figuring maybe the cold was messing with the wiring. But then a voice came through, faint and garbled, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Breaker, Breaker, anyone out there? I'm going over." It trailed off into white noise, and I sat up straighter, my hands tightening on the wheel. The voice had a Kentucky drawl, thick and urgent, but distorted, like an old recording played through bad speakers. I reached for the mic, thumbing the button. "This is Big Earl on US 23 northbound. Say again, good buddy. You in trouble?" Nothing. Just silence again. The radio as dead as before. I shook my head, chuckling to myself. Probably some atmospheric skip, radio waves bouncing off the ionosphere or whatever, picking up transmissions from God knows where. Happens sometimes in the mountains, especially with weather like this. Or maybe a prankster with a powerful setup, messing with lone drivers for kicks. I'd heard of that too. I lit a cigarette, the flame from my Zippo flickering in the dark cab, and kept rolling. The overpass loomed ahead, its shadow swallowing my headlights for a moment as I passed under. I glanced up at the girders, half expecting to see something, maybe icicles hanging like fangs, but it was just empty steel and swirling snow. The road straightened out after that, dipping into a valley where the trees crowded in closer. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness cutting through the fog in my brain. I'd been driving overnights for years to avoid the daytime traffic, the soccer moms in their SUVs weaving like drunks. But there's something about the witching hour that gets to you, the way the world shrinks to just your rig and the endless ribbon of highway. No billboards, no rest areas for miles, just the occasional reflector post glinting like eyes in the dark. I thought about my ex-wife back in Ashland, how she used to beg me to find a local job, something with regular hours. "These roads will kill you, Earl," she'd say. "One bad turn and you're gone." We split 5 years back, but her words still echoed sometimes, especially on nights like this. About 20 minutes later, the second overpass appeared on the horizon. This one was newer, concrete instead of steel, but it spanned an even deeper chasm. The locals call it Devil's Drop, on account of how many vehicles had gone over the edge in bad weather. I slowed again, the tires crunching on fresh snow, and right as I neared the shadow of the bridge, the CB sparked to life once more. "Help! Brakes failing. Too fast." The voice was the same, desperate, panicked, cutting through the static like a knife. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a skip. It was too clear, too close. I grabbed the mic again. "Hey, this is Big Earl. Where you at? What's your 20? I can call it in." No response. Just the fading echo of those words, hanging in the air like smoke. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. These overpasses, they got a reputation. I remembered stopping at a diner in Prestonsburg once, overhearing old-timers talking about the wrecks. Back in the 70s, a semi lost control on black ice right under Devil's Drop, plunged into the gorge with a load of timber. Driver's name was Harlan something. Or was it? The details were fuzzy, but the story stuck. Mangled metal at the bottom, bodies they couldn't recover for days because of the terrain. And then there were the whispers about echo calls, transmissions from the past, trapped in the airwaves, replaying for anyone unlucky enough to tune in. Bullshit, I told myself. Just coincidence, or maybe my mind playing tricks from lack of sleep. But as I passed under the bridge, the radio hissed again, softer this time, like a whisper. Mary, tell Mary I'm sorry. Then static. I switched channels, flipping through 1 through 40, but the voice followed, faint but persistent. My palms were sweating now, slick on the wheel. I pulled the rig to the side of the next wide spot, a gravel turnout overlooking the valley. Engine idling, I stared at the CB, its green glow casting eerie shadows on the dash. Outside, the snow was falling heavier, blanketing the world in white. No other vehicles in sight, no headlights piercing the night. Just me, alone in the cab, with that voice echoing in my head. I shook it off, stubbed out my cigarette, and got back on the road. Had to be rational about this. Maybe a faulty antenna or interference from the lines that ran parallel to the highway in spots. I turned up the heat, blasting warm air that fogged the edges of the windshield. The next stretch was lonely as still, the road climbing up into higher elevations, where the pines gave way to bare rock faces. Cell signal was spotty here, dropped to 0 bars more often than not, so calling anyone was out. Not that I'd know what to say. Hey, dispatch, I'm hearing ghosts on the radio. They'd laugh me off the air. By 2:30 a.m., the storm was picking up, wind howling through the gaps in the mountains like a banshee. Visibility was down to maybe 50 feet, my high beams reflecting back off the snow like a wall. I was crawling now, 30 miles an hour tops, leaning forward to peer through the wipers. The third overpass was ahead, an ancient relic called Widow's Span, named for the wife of some engineer who died building it back in the 40s, or so the tale went. As I approached, the CB came alive again, louder this time, the voice crystal clear amidst the static. God, no, the guardrail's giving. Jimmy, if you hear this, take care of the kids. Then a scream, blood-curdling, the kind that rips right through you, and underneath it, the grind of metal on metal, tires screeching, an impact that boomed through the speakers like it was happening right there in the cab. I slammed on the brakes, the rig fisttailing on the ice, before coming to a shuddering stop just short of the bridge. My heart was pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. That wasn't a prank. That was real. Too real. I fumbled for the mic, yelling into it. Who is this? Stop screwing around. Silence. Then softly. Earl, why didn't you answer sooner? My name. How the hell did it know my name? I hadn't said it on the air that night, not once. I dropped the mic like it was hot, staring at the radio in horror. The cab felt smaller, the walls closing in. Outside, the snow whipped against the windows, and in the distance, I thought I heard something, a low rumble, like an echo of that crash. But it was just the wind.
I never much cared for the night hauls through the Appalachians, but a man's got to eat, and trucking was the only job that stuck after the mill closed down back in '08. My name's Harlan Tate, born and raised in the shadow of those Blue Ridges, where the fog clings to the hollers like a shroud, and the trees whisper secrets to the wind. I'd been behind the wheel for nigh on 2 decades by that summer, hauling everything from lumber to livestock, but mostly steel these days, flatbed loads that rattled like chains in the grave when the road got rough. The pay was steady, if not spectacular, and it kept me out of the house, away from the empty rooms that echoed with memories of better times. My boy, Tommy, was 14 then, living with his mama in a little clapboard place outside Boone. We'd split when he was 6, her saying I was married to the road more than her, and she wasn't wrong. I sent checks, called when I could, but the miles piled up, and so did the regrets. That particular night started like any other. I'd loaded up in Asheville just after dusk, the warehouse boys joking about the heat wave that had the whole southeast sweating bullets. It was July 18th, 2025, if memory serves. Humid as a sauna, the kind of sticky air that makes your shirt cling like a second skin. The sky was overcast, no moon or stars to light the way, just a heavy gray blanket pressing down on the world. I-40 stretched out westbound, winding through the Pisgah National Forest, where the mountains rose up like ancient guardians, their slopes thick with oak and pine. Deer signs dotted the roadside, and every now and then I'd spot a pair of eyes reflecting back from the underbrush, watchful and unblinking. I had the windows cracked, the breeze carrying in the scent of damp earth and wild honeysuckle, mixing with the diesel fumes from the stack. My rig was an Old Faithful, a 2012 Kenworth T680 with over 1 million miles on her. The cab was my home away from home, faded photos taped to the dash, Tommy's school picture from last year smiling back at me, a thermos of black coffee wedged in the cup holder, and a pack of Marlboros on the seat. The radio was tuned to some AM station out of Knoxville, playing old country tunes that crackled with static as the signal fought through the hills. Hank Williams was crooning about lost highways, his voice mournful and fitting for the hour. He was pushing midnight, and traffic was sparse. A few sedans zipping past, their taillights fading into the dark like fireflies. I was tired, sure, but not bone-weary yet. Stopped earlier at a pilot station near Canton for fuel and a sandwich. Chatted with a couple of other drivers about the weather and the price of diesel. One fella, grizzled type with a Tennessee Vols cap, mentioned the tunnels up ahead. "Watch yourself in the East River," he said, sipping his coffee. "Heard stories about that one. Echoes that ain't just sound." I laughed it off. Appalachians are full of tales. Brown mountain lights, bell witches, feral folk living in the woods. Grew up on 'em myself, sitting on my grandpap's porch while he spun yarns about miners trapped in collapses, their spirits hollering for help. But I was a practical man, chalked most of it up to isolation and hard liquor. Still, as I climbed back into the cab and revved the engine, his words lingered like smoke. The road climbed steadily, the truck downshifting as we hit the inclines, the steel beams creaking under their straps. Billboards flickered by in the headlights, ads for Dollywood, moonshine distilleries, Bible verses warning of judgment. The overcast sky made everything feel closed in, like the world was holding its breath. About 20 miles out from the tunnel, the landscape shifted. The forest pressed closer to the highway, branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. Fog started to roll in from the valleys, wispy tendrils that swirled in the beams, reducing visibility to a hazy glow. I flipped on the fog lights, their yellow hue cutting through the murk, but it only made the shadows deeper, more pronounced. My mind wandered, as it does on long drives, thinking about Tommy, how he'd asked for a new bike last time we talked, and how I promised to get it for him next paycheck. Guilt gnawed at me, slow and persistent, like termites in wood. The radio faded out completely, leaving just the hum of the tires and the engine's steady rumble. I reached for the CB, twiddled a knob, but all I got was white noise, occasional bursts of garbled voices that sounded like they were underwater. The entrance to the East River Tunnel appeared around a bend, sudden and imposing. It's one of those feats of engineering that folks take for granted, bored straight through the mountain in the early 70s, over a mile of concrete and rebar holding back thousands of tons of rock. The mouth was a black void, framed by rusted guardrails and signs reading "no stopping" and emergency phones every 500 feet. Water stains streaked the portal, and vines crept along the edges, nature trying to reclaim what man had carved. I'd driven through it countless times, but that night something about it set my teeth on edge. Maybe it was the fog pooling at the entrance, or the way the darkness seemed to pulse, inviting yet forbidding. I downshifted, the truck easing into the maw, headlights illuminating the curved walls ahead. Inside, the change was immediate. The outside world vanished, replaced by the enclosed echo chamber of the tunnel. The air cooled noticeably, carrying a damp chill that seeped through the vents, smelling of wet stone and faint exhaust. The engine's growl amplified, bouncing off the walls in a deep, resonant bass that vibrated the mirrors. Over headlights, sodium vapors spaced every 100 yards or so, cast an orange pall, their buzz barely audible over the noise. The road was smooth but slick from seepage, tires hissing like snakes on the pavement. I kept my eyes forward, hands at 10 and 2, but a prickling started at the base of my skull, that animal instinct that something's not right. At first, it was nothing I could pin down, just the usual tunnel jitters. These places play tricks on you. The confinement, the lack of horizon, it messes with your sense of space. I'd heard about drivers getting claustrophobic, pulling over in a panic, but I wasn't one of them. Still, as I pushed deeper, the air grew heavier, like the mountain was pressing down. About a quarter-mile in, I noticed the temperature drop more, my breath fogging slightly on the windshield. I cranked the heater, but it only wheezed warm air sporadically. The whispers started then, so faint I thought it was the wind whistling through a crack in the door seal, a soft murmur, like someone talking in the next room. Turn back. I glanced in the rear view. Nothing but the receding entrance, a shrinking circle of night sky. The trailer was secure, no movement. Wind, I muttered, shaking my head. Fatigue, maybe. I'd been pushing 14 hours with only cat naps, but the sound persisted, growing just a hair louder as I rounded a slight curve. It's waiting. Clearer now, a voice, male, rough, like a smoker's rasp. My heart skipped a beat, but I rationalized it. Echoes. Tunnels like this trap sound. Air currents carry noises from miles away sometimes, or maybe the CB picking up interference. I reached over, switched it off, but the whisper lingered, echoing in my mind. The
tunnel stretched on, the overhead lights flickering intermittently, casting strobing shadows that made the wall seem to breathe. I accelerated a touch, speedometer climbing to 55, the steel load shifting slightly with a metallic groan. The air got colder still, my fingers numbing on the wheel. Then the whispers multiplied, not just one, but several, overlapping like a crowded room. Names floated through the din. Elijah, come home, mixed with warnings, the roof's giving, run, and broken sentences. She didn't make it, blood everywhere. It was unsettling the way they wove together, almost conversational, as if I was eavesdropping on ghosts. I remembered the stories then, the ones the old-timer at the truck stop had alluded to. The East River Tunnel had a dark history, construction accidents in the 70s, workers crushed under rock falls, their bodies never fully recovered. Then the wrecks, a pileup in 85 that killed 7, fog and ice making the road a slaughterhouse. Drivers who broke down inside, waiting for help that came too late, succumbing to carbon monoxide or hypothermia. Locals said the mountain held on to those moments, the stone absorbing the screams and playing them back when the conditions were right. Humidity, pressure changes, who knows? Plausible enough for a rational mind, but in that moment, buried under the earth, it felt like more. The whispers tugged at me, pulling threads of my own life into the mix. One sounded like my grandpap. Boy, you shouldn't be here. Turn around. Panic didn't hit all at once. It built slow, like a pot coming to boil. My chest tightened, breath coming shorter. I scanned the walls, spotting emergency pullouts, small alcoves with phones, their red lights glowing like eyes. Part of me wanted to stop, call for help, but what would I say? Hearing voices in the tunnel, they'd laugh me off as cracked. Instead, I pressed on, the exit still a distant speck. The shadows on the walls grew more defined, elongated forms that looked like figures, arms outstretched, heads bowed. Optical illusion, I told myself, the play of light and motion. But one shape caught my eye, a silhouette that resembled a man in overalls, pickaxe slung over shoulder, frozen in mid-step. It vanished as I passed, but the image burned in. Deeper in, the air turned frigid, frost rimming the edges of the windows. The heater blasted full, but it couldn't touch the cold. The whispers intensified, pressing in from all sides, no longer just echoes, but directed at me. Harlan, you left her, a woman's voice hissed, sounding eerily like my ex Sarah. My stomach dropped. How could it know? Guilt surged, memories flooding, our last argument, her tears as I packed my bag, Tommy watching from the doorway. Daddy's going on a trip, I'd said, but we all knew it was more. The voices latched on, trusting. Tommy waits, but you won't come back. A child's whimper joined in, piercing and familiar. I floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward, engine bellowing like a beast. The walls blad, light streaking past, but the tunnel seemed to lengthen, the exit receding. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold, trickling down my back. The shadows danced wildly now, forming scenes. Workers scrambling as rock stumbled. A car crumbled against the wall. Figures huddled in fear. One shadow reached out, brushing the passenger window. Impossible, but I swerved anyway, tires screeching. Get out, I yelled, voice cracking, echoing back multiplied. The cold deepened, my breath shallow, vision tunneling. The whispers climaxed, a cacophony of pleas and accusations, filling the cab like smoke. Buried, alive, help us, it's waiting for you. Panic crested, heart hammering, hands slick on the wheel. Then suddenly, the exit loomed, night air rushing in as I burst out. The voices faded to murmurs, then silence. I pulled over miles later, shaking, lighting a smoke with trembling fingers. The night was still, fog lifting, but the whispers echo in my head even now, especially on dark roads. I avoid that tunnel when I can, but the mountain calls, its secrets waiting, and sometimes, in quiet moments, I hear them again, waiting.
I've been hauling freight for over 20 years now, crisscrossing this country in rigs that feel more like home than any house I've ever owned. Name's Harlan, and I'm from down around Kingsport, Tennessee, where the mountains start to swallow up the sky. I prefer the interstates, wide lanes, steady traffic, rest stops with hot coffee and folks who don't ask too many questions. But sometimes the loads dictate the route, and you end up on those back roads, the kind that twist through the Appalachian hollows like veins in an old man's hand. Narrow, potholed, flanked by trees that seem to lean in as if they're listening. I never much cared for them, especially at night. There's a loneliness to those roads that seeps into your bones, makes you think about things you'd rather forget. It was late autumn, the kind of season where the air turns crisp and carries the scent of decaying leaves, like the earth itself is exhaling its last breath before winter clamps down. I'd picked up a load of produce in Johnson City, crates of apples, pumpkins, and whatever else the farms up there churn out, and was headed south to Chattanooga. The manifest said to stick to State Route 52, a two-laner that winds through the hills, but it's reliable enough during the day. Nighttime's different, though. The harvest moon hung low and fat in the sky, casting everything in this pale, orange glow that made the shadows stretch longer than they had any right to. Leaves rustled in the wind, swirling across the asphalt like restless spirits, and the road was empty. Not a single set of headlights coming or going. Just me, the hum of the diesel engine, and the static crackle of the CB radio that I kept on out of habit, even though no one ever chatted on those channels anymore. I'd been driving for hours, sipping black coffee from a thermos to keep the fatigue at bay. My mind wandered to the usual places. My ex-wife back in Kingsport, wondering if she'd remarried yet. The kid I hadn't seen in years, off at some college I couldn't afford to visit. The radio was playing old country tunes, Johnny Cash crooning about walking the line, when my GPS started acting up. It was one of those fancy units mounted on the dash, the kind that talks to you in a calm, robotic voice. Recalculating, it said. Then the screen flickered, pixels dancing like fireflies. Signal dropped. No bars on my phone either. I cursed under my breath, tapping the screen as if that would fix it. These mountains play hell with electronics. Valleys so deep the satellites can't see you. Cell towers few and far between. I figured it'd come back once I crested the next ridge. But it didn't. Instead, the GPS blinked back to life and directed me onto what looked like a spur road, unmarked on the map but showing up as a shortcut. Turn right in 500 feet, it intoned. I hesitated, peering through the windshield. The main road ahead looked fine, but the load was time-sensitive. Perishables don't wait, and I didn't want to risk getting stuck behind some slow-moving farm truck. So I eased the rig onto the spur, the tires crunching over gravel that mixed with the fading pavement. Right away, I felt it, the shift. The road narrowed, the trees closing in like walls on either side, their branches scraping against the trailer with a sound like fingernails on tin. The moon's light filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, making the path ahead look like a patchwork quilt of shadow and glow. Leaves continued to fall, pattering on the hood, and the wind picked up, whistling through cracks in the cab. I drove on, telling myself it was just a detour, nothing more. The air grew cooler, seeping in despite the heater blasting. I rolled down the window a crack to clear the fog on the glass, and that's when I caught the first whiff, something metallic, like rust mixed with wet earth. Probably just the damp from a recent rain, I thought, but it lingered, making my nose twitch. The road twisted sharper now, forcing me to downshift, the engine growling in protest. No guardrails here, just steep drop-offs into blackness on one side, thick underbrush on the other. I glanced at the dash clock, past midnight. My phone, still no signal, sat useless in the cup holder. I picked it up anyway, thumbing through the contacts out of habit, landing on my sister's number. She lived up in these parts, in a little hollow near Irwin, and she'd always warned me about straying off the beaten path. "Them old roads got stories, Harlan," she'd say, her voice low over family dinners. "Folks go missing, and ain't nobody finds them except the crows." I shook off the memory, focusing on the wheel. The GPS had gone silent again, the screen frozen on a blank map. I was about to pull over and check the fuses when my phone rang. Sharp, insistent, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Unknown number. I stared at it for a ring or two, heart picking up pace. Who the hell would be calling at this hour, especially with no signal? But curiosity won out. I hit answer and put it on speaker. "Hello?" My voice sounded rough, echoing in the cab. Static at first, then a voice, faint, crackly, like it was coming from an old landline. "You're on the wrong road." A man's voice, older, with that thick Appalachian drawl that drags on the vowels. "They're coming. Turn back now." Click. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the wheel tighter, the rig rumbling along at 20 miles an hour. Wrong road? Who was that? Prank call, maybe, some local with a scanner picking up trucker fricks. But the phone showed no bars. How'd the call even come through? Unease prickled at the back of my neck like someone watching from the trees. I tried redialing, but nothing. Dead air. The road ahead dipped into a hollow, the trees thicker now, their trunks gnarled and twisted like arthritic hinders. I could hear things out there, rustling in the underbrush, not just leaves but something heavier, like footsteps pacing the truck. Deer, I told myself, plenty of them in these woods. But the dread was building, slow and steady, like fog rolling in from the valleys. I kept driving, eyes scanning the edges of the headlight beams. The pavement had all but crumbled away, replaced by packed dirt rutted with puddles that splashed under the tires. The wind howled louder, carrying distant sounds, maybe an owl hooting, or was it a whistle? These areas have tales old as the hills themselves, lost travelers, signals crossed with the beyond. My grandpa used to spin yarns by the fire about Haint roads, paths where the veil between worlds thins, and you hear voices that ain't meant for the living. I never much put stock in it, superstition I figured, but out here, alone, it gnawed at me.
The phone rang again. Same unknown number. I answered quicker this time, my pulse thudding in my ears. Who is this? How'd you get my number? More static, then the voice. Egg Red Kenworth, Tennessee plates. Produce load. You're heading deeper into the spur. They know you're here now. Eyes on you. My blood ran cold. How do you know about the truck? The plates? I glanced in the side mirrors. Nothing but darkness swallowing the road behind. Who's they? What the hell's going on? They're the ones that wait in the hollows. Been here longer than us. Turn around, son, before the signals get crossed permanent. Click. I slammed on the brakes, the rig shuddering to a halt. Dust kicked up around the tires, settling slow in the moonlight. My hands shook as I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, shining it into the woods. Trees, endless trees, their leaves whispering secrets. But then, movement, a shadow darting between trunks, too quick to make out, and eyes glinting back at me, reflective like a cat, but higher off the ground, human height. I cut the light, heart hammering. Just animals, Harlan, raccoons or coyotes, but the voice on the phone, it knew too much. I threw the truck back in gear, inching forward. No way to turn around here. The road was too narrow, cliffs on one side, drop on the other. I'd have to find a clearing or risk backing up blind. The calls kept coming, every few minutes now, each one more urgent. They're closing in, the voice said once. Hear 'em? That's their call. And sure enough, as I listened, the wind carried eerie sounds, low whistles, like someone signaling through the trees, mixed with rustles that sounded like muffled footsteps. I rolled up the window, blasting the heater, but the chill was inside me now. Memories flooded back as I drove, unbidden. Growing up in these mountains, you hear stories. Feral people, they call them. Folks who went wild generations ago, living off the land, shunning civilization. Grandpa said they were descendants of miners who got trapped in collapses, emerging changed, eyes adapted to the dark, or runaways from the old wars, hiding in the hollows. Isolation does things to a person, twists them. I'd laughed it off as a kid, but out here, with the trees pressing close, it felt real, unsettlingly real. What if those shadows weren't deer? What if they were watching, waiting for me to stop? The road descended further, into a valley where the moon barely penetrated. Fog crept in, swirling around the rig like smoke from a dying fire. My headlights cut through them in weak beams, illuminating gnarled roots that clawed at the dirt path. I spotted an old sign, rusted and leaning. Private property, keep out. But the road continued past it. No houses, no lights, just endless forest. The phone rang again. I almost didn't answer, but the silence was worse. You see the cabin yet? The voice asked. No hello. Cabin? I squinted ahead. Through the fog, shapes emerged. A dilapidated structure off to the side. Boards sagging, windows dark and shattered. Looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. Vines choked the porch, and something hung from the eaves. Rags, maybe, or wind chimes made of bones. I slowed, staring. Yeah, I see it. Don't stop. That's where they gather. Signals strongest there. Crossed lines from the old days. Miners' radios, lost hikers' calls. You're picking up echoes, but they ain't just echoes anymore. Who are you? I demanded, voice cracking. Someone who took the wrong road once. Too late for me. Save yourself. Click. The dread was a living thing now, coiling in my gut. I accelerated past the cabin, glimpsing movement on the porch, shadows shifting, or was it the wind? Eyes glinted again from the tree line, multiple pairs now, tracking the truck. The whistles grew louder, closer, like a pack coordinating. Survival instinct kicked in. I floored it, the rig bouncing over ruts, produce crates shifting in the back with thuds. But the road narrowed even more, branches whipping the sides like lashes. I heard something hit the trailer, a rock or a hand. Panic set in. I grabbed the CB, twisting the knob. Breaker, breaker, this is Harlan on Route 52 Spur. Anyone copy? Need assistance, possible hostiles. Static. Then faintly, the same voice from the phone. They're here. How? The CB wasn't connected to the phone. Signals crossed, he'd said. The beyond. My mind raced. Old legends of these hollows, where radio waves bend funny, picking up transmissions from God knows where, or when. Ghost signals, they called them in trucker lore. But this felt too personal, too real. The calls intensified, every minute now. They smell the fear on you. See the eyes? That's them. Run, but don't look back. I screamed into the phone once, begging for...
Wait, that's only about 1,500 words. I need to expand to 5,000, 5,500. Let me think how to flesh it out more. To reach the word count, I need to add more detailed descriptions, internal monologues, flashbacks, build tension with more incidents, describe the environment in depth, incorporate more Appalachian elements like legends, sounds, isolation. Expanded structure. Introduction. Detailed setup of the drive. Background on narrator's life, family, past experiences. 800 words. Building to first sighting. Describe the road, weather, radio, thoughts. 800 words. First sighting and doubt. Slow build. Descriptions. 600 words. Hypnotic following, leading to brake failure. 700 words. Near miss, pullover, reflections on stories. 600 words. Continue driving, more sightings, escalating dread. 800 words. Second incident, tire blow, near wreck. 600 words. Hike to cabin, discoveries there, eerie night. 600 words. Aftermath, lingering fear. 400 words. Total, around 5,300. Make sure it's continuous paragraphs, no breaks. Incorporate themes: isolation, alone on road, survival, fighting the pull, mechanical failures, strange sightings, lights, unsettling realism, plausible explanations but doubt, cabins, ends at one, forest legends, grandpap's tales, unexplainable dread, ongoing, eerie sounds, throughout, no fantasy, lights could be natural but disturbing, feral people, hints like footprints or sounds. Ending, lingering fear, no closure. I can't shake that night on WV10 no matter how many years pass or how hard I try to bury it under the routine of everyday life. It's like the mountains etched it into me, a scar that aches when the weather turns foul or when I hear a distant rumble of thunder echoing through the hollers. I was 48 then, a trucker by trade, hauling whatever paid the bills, lumber, coal, but that run was fuel, diesel sloshing in the tanker behind me like a ticking bomb. I'd taken the job because my old friend Eddie was laid up with a bad back, and the company needed someone reliable for the overnight from Princeton to Logan. Sarah, my wife, didn't like it. "Those cliffs are no joke, Tom," she'd said, packing my lunch with that worried furrow in her brow. We'd been together since high school, raised our boy and girl in a little house outside Bluefield, where the coal trains still rattle the windows at night. The kids were off to college now, leaving the place quieter, and these long hauls were my way of keeping the mortgage paid. But Sarah knew the risks. She'd lost her daddy to a mining collapse when she was young, and the mountains had a way of reminding you they could take what they wanted. The drive started ordinary enough. I left at dusk, the sun dipping behind the ridges like it was in a hurry to hide. WV10 winds through some of the roughest terrain in West Virginia, carved out back in the day for the coal trucks, with turns so sharp they call them switchbacks, that could make even a seasoned driver white-knuckle the wheel. No interstates here, just 2 lanes of patched asphalt hugging the mountainside, one side sheer rock face dripping with seepage, the other a plunge into valleys choked with kudzu and forgotten creeks. I'd driven it plenty in daylight, but night changed everything. The darkness swallowed the details, turning familiar landmarks into vague shapes, and the fog that rolled up from the Gayadandi River made it feel like you were driving through a dream, or maybe a nightmare waiting to unfold. I had the heater cranked against the chill, the cab smelling of coffee and the faint tang of diesel from a leak I'd meant to fix. The radio was tuned to a station out of Beckley, playing all Johnny Cash tunes interspersed with weather updates. Rain moving in, they said, with gusts that could rock a big rig. As I climbed out of the flatlands, the road narrowed, the engine straining against the grade. My mind wandered to keep alert, thinking about the weekend ahead. Maybe take Sarah fishing at the New River, like we used to when the kids were small. She'd pack deviled eggs and cold beer, and we'd sit on the bank, talking about nothing and everything. Those memories kept me grounded on lonely runs like this, a reminder there was life beyond the headlights. But as the clock ticks past 10 p.m., the isolation started to press in. No other vehicles, no lights from houses. The few folks who lived up here were tucked in remote hollers, their cabins hidden behind thickets of rhododendron and pine. The only company was the occasional deer eye shine reflecting back at me, or the screech of an owl from the treetops. Eerie, those sounds, like the forest was alive and watching, whispering secrets it didn't want shared. It was around then, past the turnoff for Waiko, that I first noticed something off. The fog was thickening, swirling in eddies caught in my high beams, and out on the periphery, just beyond the edge of the cliff, I caught a glimpse of light. Not headlights. There was no hum of an approaching engine, no red taillights to warn. This was softer, a pale glow like a lantern swinging in the wind. But there was no wind that night, just the steady drizzle starting to patter on the roof. I blinked hard, figuring it was fatigue or maybe a reflection from my own lights on the wet guardrail. Truckers get like that after hours on the road, seeing phantoms where there's only shadow. I sipped from my thermos, the bitter coffee jolting me, and focused on the curve ahead, easing off the gas as the road banked left, the tanker pulling against the turn. But the light didn't fade. If anything, it multiplied. 2, then 3 orbs hovering maybe 20 feet off the shoulder, bobbing gently like they were tethered to invisible strings. They were the size of grapefruits, glowing with a bluish tint that didn't match any man-made light I'd seen. No sodium orange from street lamps, no halogen light from cars. They danced along the cliff's edge, dipping low then rising, paralleling my path as I rounded the bend. My skin prickled, that primal sense of being watched, like when you're hiking alone and hear twigs snap behind you.
I told myself it was ball lightning or some atmospheric quirk. The mountains play tricks with electricity, especially after a storm. Grandpap used to talk about St. Elmo's fire on the masts of old ships, but up here, in the Appalachians where the earth is riddled with old mines and magnetic ore, it could happen, I reasoned. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, the way they seemed to move with purpose, leading me onward. The radiostat flared then, cutting through a song mid-verse, a burst of white noise that made me flinch. In it, I swore I heard a murmur, low and indistinct, like voices overlapping from a bad connection. I twisted the knob, scanning for a clearer signal, but it settled on silence, just the wipers thumping and the tires hissing on the wet pavement. The orbs kept pace, their glow casting faint illuminations on the roadside, jagged rocks, metal tips from an old crash barrier bent like it had been hit hard. I remembered hearing about a wreck there years back, a semi that went over carrying lumber, the driver never found. Search parties combed the valley for days, but the underbrush down there is thick, full of sinkholes and forgotten shafts from the coal days. Folks said he might have survived the fall, wandered off dazed, only to get lost in the woods, or worse, encountered something out there. Feral people, they whispered, descendants of hermits or escaped convicts gone wild, living like animals in the deep forest, preying on the unwary. I pushed the thought away, but it lingered like the fog. Grandpap's stories came flooding back as I drove, his voice rough from decades in the mines, sitting by the potbelly stove in his cabin up near Pipston. "The hills got eyes, boy," he'd say, puffing on his pipe. Not just the critters, but the old ones, the spirits of them that died hard, miners crushed in cave-ins, settlers starved in blizzards. They don't rest easy. They call to the living, draw them into the dark. He'd tell of lights on the ridges, guiding lost hikers to safety or leading them to doom depending on the tale. One stuck with me, a logger back in the 30s who followed glowing orbs off a trail, found days later at the bottom of a ravine, eyes wide open like he'd seen hell itself. No broken bones, just terror frozen on his face. Superstition, I always thought, but now with those orbs weaving ahead, it felt too real, the dread building slow, coiling in my gut like a spring. The road twisted sharper after that, each curve a battle to keep the rig centered, the weight of the fuel shifting with every lean. I found myself glancing at the lights more than I should, their dance hypnotic, pulling my eyes from the pavement. It was like they were pacing me, adjusting their speed to match mine, always just ahead, beckoning around the next bend. The rain picked up, sheets of it sluicing down the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. My speed crept up without me realizing, the engine revving higher as I followed their lead. A voice in my head whispered warnings, slow down, focus, but the pull was stronger, a trance-like calm settling over me. Sarah's note came to mind, tucked in my pocket, be careful on those curves. I reached for it, but my hand froze on the wheel as the orbs flared brighter, swirling in a pattern that mimicked the road's serpentine path. Then came the turn that nearly ended me. It was a nasty one, marked with checkers and a faded 15 miles per hour sign, the cliff dropping straight down into blackness. The orbs let in, dipping low as if pointing the way, and I pressed the brake to bleed speed. Nothing. The pedal sank limp to the floor, no hydraulic bite, no ABS kick. Panic exploded in my chest, adrenaline flooding hot as the truck barreled forward, tires hydroplaning on the slick asphalt. The curve sharpened, the edge rushing back, and I yanked the wheel left, the rig fishtailing, gravel crunching under the tires as the shoulder gave way. The tanker swung wide, the cab tilting precariously, and for an eternal second, I saw the void below, treetops swaying in the wind, rocks glinting wet. I frantically downshifted, gears grinding, the engine bellowing as it fought the momentum. Somehow the tires caught traction, pulling me back from the brink with inches to spare. The truck shuddered to a halt, half on the shoulder, headlights stabbing into the fog. I sat there, breath ragged, hands trembling on the wheel. The orbs hovered nearby, their glow pulsing like laughter, then faded into the night. I pumped the brakes. They worked now, firm and responsive. A temporary failure? Moisture in the lines from the rain? Or something more sinister, like the story suggested? Lights that tampered with machines, luring drivers to join the wrecks below. I killed the engine, stepped out into the downpour, the cold shocking me alert. The cliff edge was mere feet away, the drop hundreds of feet to the riverbed. Down there, in the beam of my flashlight, I spotted remnants of old crashes, rusted fenders, shattered glass scattered like confetti from the dead. How many had gone over here, seduced by those lights? The dread washed over me, a wave of unexplainable fear that made my knees weak. I climbed back in, texted Sarah a quick, all good, rough weather, and tried to steady myself. But the forest sounds amplified, the drip of water from leaves, the distant crack of branches, like footsteps circling. I couldn't stay there, the load had to deliver. So I started up again, creeping slow, eyes locked on the road. But the orbs returned within minutes, more of them now, a dozen or so lining the cliff like sentinels. Their dance was insistent, pulling at me, and the hypnosis crept back. I fought it with everything, blasting the air conditioner to chill the cap, singing old hymns under my breath. The hours blurred, the curves endless, each one ratcheting the tension. Memories surfaced to distract me. My boy's first deer hunt, Sarah's laugh at family reunions, Grandpap's cabin where we'd spend summers, the wood smoke and tall tales by the fire. He'd warn about the feral folk too, People gone mad from isolation, living in caves or ruined shacks, their eyes glowing in the dark like those orbs. They mimic sounds, he'd say, calls of lost children or wounded animals, to draw you in. Was that what I heard now, in the lulls between rainbursts? Whispers, moans, carried on the wind, eerie and human-like. Past midnight, the fog lifted a bit, but the dread deepened. The orbs led on, their glow illuminating faded memorials along the road, crosses nailed to trees, plastic flowers weathered by time. Each one a story, a life cut short. I thought of switching off to a side road, finding a motel, but the route...
I've never been one to scare easy. Grew up in the hollows outside Beckley, West Virginia, where the mountains lean in close and the nights get so quiet you can hear your own blood moving through your veins. My daddy used to say, the woods out here don't mind people passing through, long as they keep moving. Stop too long, and something notices. I always figured that was just talk to keep us kids from wandering off. But after what happened on PA 33 that night back in the fall of 22, I reckon he knew more than he let on. I was hauling the load of furniture up to Scranton for a cousin who'd finally got himself a house after years of drifting. It was one of those jobs you take when the regular runs dry up. Long hours, lousy pay, but it kept the truck payments current. I'd left Charleston around noon, figuring I'd make the delivery by morning if I pushed straight through. By the time I crossed into Pennsylvania, the sun had been down for hours, and the coffee in my thermos had gone cold and bitter. My eyes were burning, and my back felt like someone had parked a logging truck on it. I needed to stop, stretch my legs, maybe splash some water on my face before I nodded off and wrapped my rig around a guardrail. That's when I saw the sign for the rest area. Just a plain green rectangle with white letters. Rest area, 1 mile. No services listed, no little icons for food or fuel, just the promise of a place to pull off. I'd driven this stretch of 33 plenty of times over the years, but I couldn't remember ever seeing that exit before. Maybe I'd always been running with a partner and we'd pushed on to the bigger truck stops farther north. Maybe the sign was new. Or maybe I was just too tired to think straight. Either way, I flicked on my blinker and took the ramp. The lot was small, barely room for a dozen cars and maybe 3 or 4 rigs nose to tail along the far side. Gravel crunched under my tires as I eased in, headlights sweeping across empty spaces and a couple of overflowing trash barrels. No other trucks, no cars. Not even a state trooper parked in the shadows like they sometimes do. Just darkness pressing in from the tree line and a single sodium lamp buzzing overhead, throwing down that sickly orange glow that makes everything look bruised. I killed the engine and sat there a minute, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the faint whistle of wind through the pines. The place felt wrong right from the start, like stepping into a house where somebody just died. I told myself it was nothing, just fatigue playing tricks. Grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket, climbed down and stretched until my spine popped. The air was cold enough to bite the lungs, carrying that sharp smell of wet leaves and something else underneath, old cigarette smoke maybe, with a ghost of a cook fire. The building sat at the near end of the lot, low concrete block, flat roof, men's and women's doors on opposite sides of a little vestibule. A couple of vending machines glowed faintly inside, the kind that haven't been updated since the 80s. Glass fronts cracked, half the selection sold out forever. I pushed through the door, boots echoing on the tile. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed and flickered like they were arguing about whether to stay lit. Place smelled of bleach trying to cover up mildew and something coppery I didn't want to name. I used the facilities quick, washed my hands in water so cold it hurt, then stood at the sink staring at my reflection. I looked like hell, eyes red, cheeks hollow, 3 days of stubble going gray at the edges. For a second I thought I saw something move behind me in the mirror, a darker shape sliding across the wall where no shadow ought to be. I turned fast, but there was nothing, just the empty row of stalls and the paper towel dispenser hanging open like a broken jaw. I told myself to get back on the road, get the coffee reheated at the next real stop, push on through. But my legs were stiff, and the idea of climbing back into that cab right then felt impossible. There was a little alcove off the vestibule with a couple of molded plastic chairs and a Pennsylvania highway map bolted to the wall, yellowed and curling at the corners. I figured I'd sit 5 minutes, let the blood move again. That's when I first heard the voices. They were low, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights, but unmistakable. 2 people talking, maybe 3, words too soft to make out, coming from the direction of the women's side. I froze, listening. Could have been travelers like me, somebody else pulling in quiet. But I hadn't heard another engine, hadn't seen headlights sweep the lot, and the voices didn't sound right. Too flat, too slow, like folks speaking underwater. I stood up slow, hands
hand tightening on the flashlight, walked to the corner and peered around. The women's door was propped open an inch with a folded newspaper, letting a slice of darkness spill out. The voices stopped the second I moved. Dead silence, thick as creek mud. I called out, "Anybody in there?" My own voice sounded too loud, bouncing off the tile. No answer, just that bleach and mildew smell, stronger now, mixed with something sweeter, like rotting apples. I should have left then, should have walked straight out to my truck, fired it up and rolled, but my legs were stiff, and the idea of climbing back into that cab right then felt impossible. There was a little alcove off the vestibule, with a couple of molded plastic chairs, and a Pennsylvania highway map bolted to the wall, yellowed and curling at the corners. I figured I'd sit 5 minutes, let the blood move again. That's when I first heard the voices. They were low, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights, but unmistakable. 2 people talking, maybe 3, words too soft to make out, coming from the direction of the women's side. I froze, listening. Could have been travelers like me, somebody else pulling in quiet, but I hadn't heard another engine, hadn't seen headlights sweeped a lot, and the voices didn't sound right. Too flat, too slow, like folks speaking underwater. I stood up slow, hand tightening on the flashlight, walked to the corner and peered around. The women's door was propped open an inch with a folded newspaper, letting a slice of darkness spill out. The voices stopped the second I moved. Dead silence, thick as creek mud. I called out, "Anybody in there?" My own voice sounded too loud, bouncing off the tile. No answer, just that bleach and mildew smell, stronger now, mixed with something sweeter, like rotting apples. I should have left then, should have walked straight out to my truck, fired it up and rolled, but my legs were stiff, and the idea of climbing back into that cab right then felt impossible. There was a little alcove off the vestibule, with a couple of molded plastic chairs, and a Pennsylvania highway map bolted to the wall, yellowed and curling at the corners. I figured I'd sit 5 minutes, let the blood move again. That's when I first heard the voices. They were low, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights, but unmistakable. 2 people talking, maybe 3, words too soft to make out, coming from the direction of the women's side. I froze, listening. Could have been travelers like me, somebody else pulling in quiet, but I hadn't heard another engine, hadn't seen headlights tip up, left to something I don't see now. Slide as God, shadow breathing inside. Just sing, pulling on, just outside on life, just the inside,
That night haunts me still, replaying in dreams where the road never ends, the fog eternal. I quit long hauling after that, stuck to local runs, but even now, sitting on my porch in the holler, I listen to the wind through the trees. It sounds like horns sometimes, distant and lonely, pulling at something deep inside. I've told this story to a few folks over beers, but they laugh it off. Mountain madness, they say. Maybe they're right. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The Appalachians keep their secrets, burying them under layers of time and mist, and sometimes they let one slip, just to remind you how small you are, how easily you can vanish into the night. Days turned to weeks, and I tried to shake it, went back to the road, because what else is there for a man like me? But every run on VA 83 felt charged, like static before a storm. I'd scan the shoulders for wreckage, half expecting to see my own rig there, rusted and forgotten. Once, I stopped at that same truck stop, asked around about Jim, Roy, Dale. Folks remembered them vaguely, regulars, good guys, but no one had heard from them since that night. Missing persons reports filed, but in these parts, people disappear all the time. Hunting accidents, mine collapses, or just walking into the woods and never coming out. I started researching, late nights with a bottle and my laptop. Old forums, trucker tales from the 80s, 90s. Patterns emerged. Convoys vanishing on remote stretches. Horns heard by survivors. Wreckage found that didn't match the timeline. One story from 1964. A group of loggers on the same road. Trucks gone. Echoes in the valleys. Locals blamed it on bootleggers or feuds, but the details mirrored mine. Then there were the Faro people legends. Whispers of clans living in the deep ridges, shunning society, surviving on what the land provides, or takes. Some say they mimic sounds to lure prey, horns and voices to draw you off the path. Plausible? In the light of day? No. But at night, when the quiet presses in. I drove the route again months later, couldn't stay away. Fog rolled in thick as before.
Halfway through, the horn started, faint, then building. I gripped the wheel, sweat slicking my palms. Ahead, taillights flickered in the mist, but I was alone. Or was I? Shapes in the fog, trucks that weren't there. I pulled over, heart racing, and walked into the trees, drawn by the sounds. Found another wreck, older still, but with a CB radio intact. Static crackled, then a voice. Mine. Harlan. Fade. I smashed it with a rock, ran back. Now I don't drive anymore. Sold the rig, bought a small place up in the hills, ironic as that is. But the isolation follows. Nights I hear them, horns from the valley, echoing like a promise. Friends gone, family distant, just me and the memories. Was it real, or did the mountain break something in me? The fear lingers, confusion a constant companion. Sorrow for those lost, for the part of me that vanished with them. And the question, when the horns call again, will I answer, or keep fading into the silence? The story doesn't end there, though I'd give anything if it did. Living up here, away from the main roads, you'd think the peace would settle in. But these hills have a way of amplifying the quiet, until it's deafening. My cabin's nothing fancy. Log walls, a stone fireplace, windows that rattle in the wind. I spend days chopping wood, tending a small garden, trying to outrun the thoughts. But nights are different. The darkness creeps down from the ridges, pooling in the hollows, and with it come the sounds. It started small, a few weeks after I moved in. I'd wake to horns blaring, not distant like on the road, but close, like they were right outside. I'd bolt upright, grab my shotgun, peer out the window. Nothing but trees swaying, moonlight filtering through. I'd tell myself it was a dream, echoes from that night trapped in my head. But then the voices came, faint at first, snippets of conversation over static. Jim's drawl, Roy's laugh, Dale's grunt. Keep it tight, boys. Feral folk. They'd loop, getting clearer, until I could swear they were in the room with me. One night, storm raging, power out. I sat by the fire, flames dancing shadows on the walls. The horn swelled, accompanied by engines rumbling, tires on gravel. I stepped outside, rain lashing my face, and there, in the beam of my flashlight, tire tracks in the mud, fresh, leading into the woods. I followed them, boots sinking, heart thumping. The path narrowed, branches clawing at my arms. Deeper in, the tracks ended at a clearing, and there they were, wrecks. Not just trucks, but cars, jeeps, even an old school bus, all tangled in vines, rusted husks. But among them, my old Kenworth, cab intact, door ajar. Impossible. I'd sold it months ago. I approached, hand trembling, and inside, on the seat, my thermos, coffee still steaming. I ran then, back to the cabin, barred the door, but the dread had rooted deep. Was I losing it, or was the mountain pulling me in, replaying not just their disappearances, but mine? I started seeing things, shapes in the trees, gaunt figures watching from the tree line, feral people, ghosts, or my mind fracturing under the weight of isolation. I'd hike out during the day, talk to neighbors miles away. They'd nod sympathetically, sharing their own tales. A cousin gone missing, strange lights in the hills. The land remembers, one old-timer said, takes what it wants, gives back echoes. Weeks blurred. I stopped sleeping, paced the floors, listening. The horns became a symphony, layered with screams now. Please, Harlan, help. My name, over and over. I tried leaving, packed a bag, headed for the truck. Wait, I don't have a truck anymore. Walked to the road, thumb out. But cars passed without stopping, like I wasn't there. Finally one picked me up, an old farmer heading to town. He glanced at me odd. You look like you've seen a haint, son. I told him bits, and he went quiet. VA 83. Folks say it's cursed. Convoys ash, wrecks appear out of time. My pa lost a brother there in 42. In town, I checked into a motel. Thought distance would help. But that night, horns echoed from the parking lot. I looked out. My rig parked under the streetlight, engine idling. I didn't go to it. Instead, I returned to the cabin, drawn back like a moth to flame. Now I sit here, fire crackling, wind howling. The sounds are constant companions, a reminder of the void. Isolation isn't just being alone. It's knowing you're next, but not when. The sorrow weighs heavy. For Jim, Roy, Dale, for all the lost. Confusion swirls. Am I alive or already an echo? The fear, it lingers, cold and real, as the horns call from the dark, waiting for me to fade. But the pull grew stronger, the boundaries blurring. I'd find things in the cabin, a CB radio on the table, not mine, crackling with voices. Harlan, where are you? Roy's tone, desperate. I'd smash it, but another would appear. Tracks outside multiplied, leading to more wrecks in the woods. Once I followed them farther, deeper than before, the forest closing in, air thick with decay. The clearing expanded, wrecks piled like a graveyard, dates spanning centuries, Model Ts, modern semis, all bearing marks of sudden end. In the center, a figure, tall, emaciated, clothed in rags. It turned, face hidden in shadow, but eyes gleamed. Join us, it rasped, voice like grinding gravel. I fled, but his words echoed in my head.
Neighbors stopped visiting, said the place felt wrong, like bad air from an old mine. I didn't argue. The unexplained dread built layer by layer until it was all I knew. Eerie sounds at dawn, not just horns but footsteps circling the cabin, whispers at the windows. Fade, next. I'd shout back, voice raw, but only silence answered. Survival became routine. Eat, chop wood, listen, wait. The forest legends felt plausible now. The land alive, vengeful, replaying disappearances to feed on fear. One evening as twilight bled into night, the horns peaked, a cacophony shaking the walls. I stepped out, shotgun ready, but the yard was filled with shapes, trucks idling, lights piercing the gloom. Jim's Freightliner, Roy's Peterbilt, Dale's Mac, and mine. Doors open, engines curring. Voices called from within. Come on, Harlan, time to roll. Temptation gripped me to climb in, join the convoy, end the isolation. But something held me back, a thread of sorrow for what was lost, confusion at the brink. I turned away, back inside, but the sounds follow, they always do. The lingering fear is my constant. Am I next to fade, or have I already? The night swallows everything, leaving only echoes, and in them the unanswerable dread. The cabin became my prison, the woods my warden. I'd venture out last, sticking to the porch, watching the trees sway like sentinels. But the disturbances escalated. Objects moved, chairs scraped across floors when I wasn't looking. Doors creaked open to reveal footprints in the dust, wet and bare. Once I found a note on the table, scrawled in shaky hand. The road calls, don't resist. Not my writing, I burned it, but the smoke curled into shapes, truck silhouettes dissipating in the air. Dreams merged with waking. I'd be driving VA 83, convoy ahead, horns blaring, then vanishings, wreckages, and I'd wake screaming, only to hear real horns outside. Isolation gnawed, turning thoughts inward. Memories of family surfaced. Wife left years ago, tired of the road life. Kids grown, distant. Was this punishment? For all the miles, the neglect, or just the mountain's way? I tried documenting, journal entries to ground myself. Day 47, horns at midnight, voices clearer. Saw figure in trees, tall, hunched, feral. But pages would go missing, replaced with clippings like those in the abandoned cabin. More stories of lost convoys, patterns undeniable. One article from 1930s, phantom trucks haunt mountain pass. Descriptions matched, echoing horns, ancient wrecks appearing overnight. A storm hit hard one night, wind howling like banshees. Power gone, I lit candles, shadows leaping. Knocks at the door, rhythmic, insistent. I ignore, but they persisted. Finally I opened it, rain whipping in. No one, but on the threshold, a rusted horn from a truck, still warm. I hurled it into the dark, slammed the door. Then inside, laughter, Roy's echoing from the walls. The unexplainable became routine, dread a dull ache. Survival instincts kicked in, barricade doors, stock food, but the emotional grip tightened. Sorrow for the vanished, confusion at my role. Was I witness or participant? The lingering fear, one day I'll step into the night, follow the horns, become an echo. But resistance waned. The calls grew seductive, promising end to loneliness. Join the convoy, they whispered. Safety in numbers. I fought, but how long? Now as I write this, wait, am I writing? The pen moves, but the words fade like mist. The horns swell, closer. Perhaps this is the end, or just another replay. The isolation terrifies. Am I next to fade into the night? Or am I already? My story an echo for the next soul on VA 83. The question hangs unanswered in the Appalachian dark. The words blurred on the page as I sat there, the candle flickering low, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. My hand trembled, the pen slipping from my fingers. Was this real? Or another layer of the nightmare? The horns were louder now, not distant echoes, but a thunderous roar shaking the cabin's foundations. Glass rattled in the windows, and outside the wind carried voices, familiar, pleading. Harlan, it's time. Jim's drawl, unmistakable. I stood, legs unsteady, and moved to the window. The yard was illuminated by an unnatural glow, like moonlight amplified through fog. There they were, the trucks, lined up in a convoy, engines idling, exhaust curling like breath in the cold air. Big Jim's Freightliner at the front, door open, cab light on. Roy's Peterbilt behind, reefer unit humming. Dale's Mac, flatbed empty, and mine, Kenworth, polished as the day I bought it, waiting at the rear. No rust, no vines, just pristine, as if that night had never happened. My breath fogged the glass. How? I'd sold it, watched the buyer drive away, but here it was, calling me home. The figures inside, shadowy silhouettes, waved, beckoning. Feral eyes gleamed from the tree line, watching, waiting. The isolation crushed me then, a wave of sorrow for what I'd lost, friends, sanity, self. Confusion swirled. Was this the mountain's curse, replaying disappearances for eternity, or my mind's final break? I opened the door, stepped out. The air was thick, charged. The horns blared in unison, a welcome. I walked toward my rig, hand outstretched. The dread lingered, cold and gripping, but the pull was stronger. Am I next, or was I always? The night swallowed me, echoes fading into...
I remember that night like it was etched into the back of my eyelids, the kind of memory that sneaks up on you when you're alone in the cab, staring down a stretch of empty highway. My name's Harlan, and I've been hauling freight across these Appalachian backroads for nigh on 20 years. Started out young, fresh out of high school in Buchanan County, Virginia, where the coal mines were drying up, and the only way out was behind the wheel of a semi. VA 83, that winding snake of a road cutting through the Clinch Mountains, was one of my regulars. Folks call it the Hillbilly Highway sometimes, but there's nothing funny about it after dark. It's narrow, with sheer drops on one side, and walls of rock and trees on the other. The kind of place where your headlights carve out just enough world to keep going, but not enough to feel safe. I'd run it solo plenty of times, but that night, I wasn't alone. At least, not at first. It was late October,
the leaves turning that bloody red and orange, falling like confetti from hell across the asphalt. I'd picked up a load of lumber from a mill down near Grundy, headed north towards Hazy and then on to connect with I-81. The weather was turning foul, a cold mist rolling in from the valleys, the kind that clings to your windshield and makes the wipers squeal like wounded animals. I stopped at a truck stop just south of Clinchco, one of those run-down places with flickering neon and coffee that tastes like motor oil. That's where I linked up with the convoy. There were 4 of us to start. Me and my old Kenworth, beat up but reliable, a guy named Roy in a shiny Peterbilt, hauling refrigerated goods. He was chatty on the CB, always cracking jokes about his ex-wives. Then there was Dale, quiet type in a Mack, pulling flatbed with machinery strapped down tight. And leading the pack was Big Jim, a veteran hauler in a Freightliner that looked like it had seen more miles than God himself. We didn't know each other well, just faces from the road, but in these parts, you convoy up when you can. Safety in numbers, they say, keeps the deer from jumping out, shares the load on those steep grades, and wards off the loneliness that creeps in when the radio static is your only company. We rolled out around 10 p.m., Big Jim taking point. The CB crackled to life as we hit the blacktop. "All right, boys, let's keep it tight," Jim drawled, his voice thick with that mountain twang. "Fog's coming in heavy up ahead. Watch your spacing." Roy chimed in with a laugh. "Yeah, and if we see any of them haints out there, we'll just run 'em over." Haints, ghosts, spirits of the holler, old tales from these hills. Stories my granny used to spin about miners lost in cave-ins, their souls wandering the ridges, calling out in the wind. I chuckled along, but deep down those stories always stuck with me. Growing up in these parts, you learn to respect the land. The Appalachians ain't forgiving. They've swallowed whole towns, families, secrets buried under layers of kudzu and forgotten coal seams. But that night, I pushed it aside, focused on the taillights ahead, the rumble of my engine a steady heartbeat. The first hour was uneventful, just the usual grind. VA-83 twists like a river, climbing and dipping through gaps in the mountains. We'd pass the occasional hollow, dark houses tucked against the slopes, porch lights flickering like distant stars. No traffic to speak of. Most folks know better than to drive these roads at night. The fog thickened, turning the world into a gray tunnel. Our headlights bounced off it, creating halos that made the trees look like skeletal fingers reaching out. Over the CB, we traded stories to pass the time. Roy told one about a run he did through West Virginia, where he swore he saw eyes glowing in the woods, bigger than any coons. Feral folk, he said. You hear about 'em? People gone wild, living off the grid, eating what they couch. They say they come down from the hills when the moon's right. Dale grunted something non-committal, but Jim shut it down. Ain't no such thing. Just bobcats and bad moonshine making you see things. I stayed quiet, nursing my thermos of coffee, watching the mile markers tick by. But even then, an unease was settling in, like the chill seeping through the cab seals. It started subtle, the way these things do in the mountains. Around midnight, as we crested a ridge near Breaks Interstate Park, the CB popped with static, louder than usual. Big Jim's voice cut through. "You boys hear that? Sounds like horns up ahead." I perked up, straining my ears. At first, nothing, just the hum of tires on pavement. Then faint, like an echo from a distant valley, came the blare of air horns. Long, drawn-out wails, the kind truckers used to warn of danger or just to say hello in the dark. But these were off, distorted, like they were bouncing off the cliffs in a way that didn't make sense. "Maybe another convoy coming south," Roy suggested, "or loggers working late." We kept rolling, but the horns grew louder, then faded, then swelled again. It was rhythmic almost, like a call and response. Jim tried hailing on the radio. "This is Big Jim, northbound on 83. Anybody copy?" Silence, save for those echoing blasts. That's when things turned wrong. We were in a straight stretch, visibility maybe 50 yards in the fog. Big Jim's taillights were right there, red eyes piercing the mist. Dale's behind him, Roy's following. I was bringing up the rear, my rig groaning as we hit a slight incline. The horns were ahead now, clear as day, but no lights, no shapes emerging from the gray. "What the hell?" Jim muttered over the CB. "I don't see nothing." Then like a switch flipped, the horns cut off, abrupt mid-blast. Silence rushed in, thicker than the fog. I blinked, leaning forward, expecting to see brake lights flare, but nothing. Jim's truck just vanished. 1 second those taillights were there, the next swallowed by the mist. Dale's followed suit, then Roy's. It happened so quick I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe a dip in the road or the fog playing games with depth. I hit my brakes, the rig shuddering to a stop, air brakes hissing like a warning. "Jim, Dale, Roy, y'all all right?" I grabbed the CB mic, my voice steadier than I felt. Silence answered, popping and crackling. No voices, just that empty hiss.
I sat there a minute, heart thumping against my ribs, the engine idling low. The fog pressed in, turning my windshield into a blank slate. Outside, the world was gone. No road edges, no trees, just gray nothing. I killed the engine to listen, but all I heard was the tick of cooling metal in my own breathing. No horns, no engines rumbling ahead. It was like they dropped off the earth. Panic nibbled at the edges of my mind, but I shoved it down. Truckers deal with breakdowns, accidents. Maybe they'd pulled over for something. I fired up the rig, eased forward slow, high beams cutting swaths through the mist. But after a quarter mile, nothing. No skid marks, no debris, just empty road curving into the dark. I pulled over at a wide spot. A gravel turnout scarred my years of semis resting there. Grabbed my flashlight and a tire iron, just in case, and stepped out. The cold hit like a slap, damp air seeping through my flannel shirt. The forest loomed on both sides, pines and hardwoods whispering in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Jim," I hollered, my voice echoing off the rocks, coming back distorted, like someone mocking me. No answer. I walked ahead, boots crunching on the shoulder, beams sweeping the asphalt. That's when I saw it, a glint off to the side, down a shallow embankment. I slid down, heart in my throat, and there it was, wreckage, old rusted frame of a truck, cab crumbled like a beer can, vines twisting through the grill. It looked like it had been there years, decades maybe, but something was off. The paint, what was left of it, was that same blue as Big Jim's Freightliner, and tangled in the underbrush, a license plate, Virginia tags, matching the sequence I'd glimpsed on his rig earlier. My mouth went dry. I shone the light around, and that's when the dread really set in. More wreckage, scattered like forgotten toys. A Peterbilt hood, dented and overgrown. A Max trailer axle, half buried in leaves. They looked ancient, weathered by rain and time. But the details, stickers on the bumpers, a faded logo that matched Roy's reefer unit. It was them, or echoes of them. I backed up, tripping over roots, mind racing. How? We'd just been together. No crash sounds, no flames, just gone. And these hulks, they weren't fresh wrecks. Moss covered the seats, birds nested in the engines. It was like the mountain had spotted out ghosts of what happened, replaying some old tragedy. I climbed back to the road, legs shaking. The fog was lifting a bit, stars peeking in like judgmental eyes. I tried the CB again, scanning channels. Nothing but static, occasionally broken by faint horns, distant now, mocking. I thought about calling for help, but cell service in these hollers is spotty at best. Besides, what would I say? My convoy disappeared, and I found their trucks as ruins. They think I was drunk or crazy. Instead, I drove on slow, eyes peeled for any sign. The road felt different now, alive almost. Every shadow in the woods seemed to move, every rustle a footstep. I heard the legends, old-timers talking about vanishing roads in the Appalachians, stretches where folks just fade away, pulled into the mist by whatever lurks in these ancient hills. Minor spirits, they say, or something older, the land itself hungry for company after all the stripping and blasting we've done to it. Miles tick by, each one heavier than the last. I passed a sign for a pull-off, an old scenic overlook, and something compelled me to stop, maybe rest, gather my thoughts. The lot was empty, overgrown, a chain across the entrance rusted through. I parked, killed the lights, sat in the dark. That's when the sound started. At first just the wind, but then horns again, closer this time, overlapping, like a chorus of warnings. I cracked the window, and they swelled, echoing from the valley below, but mixed in were voices, faint, garbled, laughter, shouts. It sounded like our CB chatter from earlier, replaying like a bad tape. Roy's joke about his ex-wives, Jim's drawl calling for spacing. My skin crawled. I slammed the window shut, but the sound seeped in anyway, vibrating through the metal. Fear turned to something deeper, a bone-chilling isolation that wraps around your soul. These mountains, they're full of stories like this. My pa used to tell me about a great-uncle who went missing on a logging run back in the 50s. They found his truck abandoned, doors open, engine running, but no sign of him. Folks whispered about feral people, descendants of runaway slaves or draft dodgers, living wild in the deep woods, luring travelers off the path, or worse, the land's curse, places where time folds on itself, replaying tragedies like a scratched record. I didn't believe it then, but now, I glanced at the wreckage in my mind's eye, those rusted shells that were and weren't my friends' rigs. Were they gone or trapped in some loop, their disappearances echoing through the night? I drove on, the road narrowing, cliffs pressing in. Headlights caught eye shine in the trees. Deer, I told myself, but they lingered too long, unblinking. The CB stayed silent, but every so often a burst of static would carry a whisper, a fragment. Harlan, next. My name or imagination. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold. I thought about turning back, but the way behind felt just as wrong, like the fog had sealed it off. Ahead, the signs for hazy loomed, but they seemed farther than they should be, the miles stretching like taffy. It was near dawn when I stumbled upon the cabin, not marked on any map, just off a dirt spur that branched from VA 83, hidden in a thicket of laurel. My rig wouldn't fit, so I parked on the shoulder, flashlight in hand, drawn by a faint light in the window. Maybe help, a phone, anything. The bath was overgrown, roots snagging my boots. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. The cabin was old, log-built, sagging under its own weight. No vehicles outside, no sounds but the drip of water from the eaves. I knocked, the door creaking under my fist. No answer. Pushed it open, unlocked, and stepped inside.
That night haunts me still, replaying in dreams where the road never ends, the fog eternal. I quit long hauling after that, stuck to local runs, but even now, sitting on my porch in the holler, I listen to the wind through the trees. It sounds like horns sometimes, distant and lonely, pulling at something deep inside. I've told this story to a few folks over beers, but they laugh it off. Mountain madness, they say. Maybe they're right, but I know what I saw, what I felt. The Appalachians keep their secrets, burying them under layers of time and mist, and sometimes they let one slip, just to remind you how small you are, how easily you can vanish into the night. Days turned to weeks, and I tried to shake it, went back to the road, because what else is there for a man like me? But every run on VA 83 felt charged, like static before a storm. I'd scan the shoulders for wreckage, half expecting to see my own rig there, rusted and forgotten. Once, I stopped at that same truck stop, asked around about Jim, Roy, Dale. Folks remembered them vaguely, regulars, good guys, but no one had heard from them since that night. Missing persons reports filed, but in these parts, people disappear all the time. Hunting accidents, mine collapses, or just walking into the woods and never coming out. I started researching, late nights with a bottle and my laptop. Old forums, trucker tales from the 80s, 90s. Patterns emerged. Convoys vanishing on remote stretches, horns heard by survivors, wreckage found that didn't match the timeline. One story from 1964, a group of loggers on the same road, trucks gone, echoes in the valleys. Locals blamed it on bootleggers or feuds, but the details mirrored mine. Then there were the Faro people legends, whispers of clans living in the deep ridges, shunning society, surviving on what the land provides, or takes. Some say they mimic sounds to lure prey, horns and voices to draw you off the path. Plausible? In the light of day, no, but at night, when the quiet presses in. I drove the route again months later, couldn't stay away. Fog rolled in thick as before. Halfway through, the horn started, faint, then building. I gripped the wheel, sweat slicking my palms. Ahead, taillights flickered in the mist, but I was alone. Or was I? Shapes in the fog, trucks that weren't there. I pulled over, heart racing, and walked into the trees, drawn by the sounds. Found another wreck, older still, but with a CB radio intact. Static crackled, then a voice. Mine. Harlan. Fade. I smashed it with a rock, ran back. Now I don't drive anymore. Sold the rig, bought a small place up in the hills, ironic as that is. But the isolation follows. Nights I hear them, horns from the valley, echoing like a promise. Friends gone, family distant, just me and the memories. Was it real, or did the mountain break something in me? The fear lingers, confusion a constant companion. Sorrow for those lost, for the part of me that vanished with them. And the question, when the horns call again, will I answer, or keep fading into the silence? The story doesn't end there, though I'd give anything if it did. Living up here, away from the main roads, you'd think the peace would settle in. But these hills have a way of amplifying the quiet, until it's deafening. My cabin's nothing fancy. Log walls, a stone fireplace, windows that rattle in the wind. I spend days chopping wood, tending a small garden, trying to outrun the thoughts. But nights are different. The darkness creeps down from the ridges, pooling in the hollows, and with it come the sounds. It started small, a few weeks after I moved in. I'd wake to horns blaring, not distant like on the road, but close, like they were right outside. I'd bolt upright, grab my shotgun, peer out the window. Nothing but trees swaying, moonlight filtering through. I'd tell myself it was a dream, echoes from that night trapped in my head. But then the voices came, faint at first, snippets of conversation over static. Jim's drawl, Roy's laugh, Dale's grunt. Keep it tight, boys. Feral folk. They'd loop, getting clearer, until I could swear they were in the room with me. One night, storm raging, power out. I sat by the fire, flames dancing shadows on the walls. The horn swelled, accompanied by engines rumbling, tires on gravel. I stepped outside, rain lashing my face, and there, in the beam of my flashlight, tire tracks in the mud, fresh, leading into the woods. I followed them, boots sinking, heart thumping. The path narrowed, branches clawing at my arms. Deeper in, the tracks ended at a clearing, and there they were, wrecks. Not just trucks, but cars, jeeps, even an old school bus, all tangled in vines, rusted husks. But among them, my old Kenworth, cab intact, door ajar. Impossible. I'd sold it months ago. I approached, hand trembling, and inside, on the seat, my thermos, coffee still steaming. I ran then, back to the cabin, barred the door, but the dread had rooted deep.
Was I losing it, or was the mountain pulling me in, replaying not just their disappearances, but mine? I started seeing things, shapes in the trees, gaunt figures watching from the tree line, feral people, ghosts, or my mind fracturing under the weight of isolation. I'd hike out during the day, talk to neighbors miles away. They'd nod sympathetically, sharing their own tales. A cousin gone missing, strange lights in the hills. The land remembers, one old-timer said, takes what it wants, gives back echoes. Weeks blurred. I stopped sleeping, paced the floors, listening. The horns became a symphony, layered with screams now. Please, Harlan, help. My name, over and over. I tried leaving, packed a bag, headed for the truck. Wait, I don't have a truck anymore. Walked to the road, thumb out. But cars passed without stopping, like I wasn't there. Finally, one picked me up, an old farmer heading to town. He glanced at me odd. You look like you've seen a haint, son. I told him bits, and he went quiet. VA 83. Folks say it's cursed. Convoys ash. Wrecks appear out of time. My pa lost a brother there in 42. In town, I checked into a motel. Thought distance would help. But that night, horns echoed from the parking lot. I looked out. My rig parked under the streetlight, engine idling. I didn't go to it. Instead, I returned to the cabin, drawn back like a moth to flame. Now I sit here, fire crackling, wind howling. The sounds are constant companions, a reminder of the void. Isolation isn't just being alone. It's knowing you're next, but not when. The sorrow weighs heavy. For Jim, Roy, Dale, for all the lost. Confusion swirls. Am I alive or already an echo? The fear, it lingers, cold and real, as the horns call from the dark, waiting for me to fade. But the pull grew stronger, the boundaries blurring. I'd find things in the cabin. A CB radio on the table, not mine, crackling with voices. Harlan, where are you? Roy's tone, desperate. I'd smash it, but another would appear. Tracks outside multiplied, leading to more wrecks in the woods. Once I followed them farther, deeper than before, the forest closing in, air thick with decay. The clearing expanded. Wrecks piled like a graveyard, dates spanning centuries. Model Ts, modern semis, all bearing marks of sudden end. In the center, a figure, tall, emaciated, clothed in rags. It turned, face hidden in shadow, but eyes gleamed. Join us, it rasped, voice like grinding gravel. I fled, but his words echoed in my head. Neighbors stopped visiting, said the place felt wrong, like bad air from an old mine. I didn't argue. The unexplained dread built layer by layer, until it was all I knew. Eerie sounds at dawn, not just horns, but footsteps circling the cabin, whispers at the windows. Fade, next. I'd shout back, voice raw, but only silence answered. Survival became routine. Eat, chop wood, listen, wait. The forest legends felt plausible now. The land alive, vengeful, replaying disappearances to feed on fear. When evening as twilight bled into night, the horns peaked, a cacophony shaking the walls. I stepped out, shotgun ready, but the yard was filled with shapes, trucks idling, lights piercing the gloom. Jim's Freightliner, Roy's Peterbilt, Dale's Mac, and mine. Doors open, engines curring. Voices called from within. Come on, Harlan, time to roll. Temptation gripped me to climb in, join the convoy, end the isolation. But something held me back, a thread of sorrow for what was lost, confusion at the brink. I turned away, back inside, but the sounds follow, they always do. The lingering fear is my constant. Am I next to fade, or have I already? The night swallows everything, leaving only echoes, and in them the unanswerable dread. The cabin became my prison, the woods my warden. I'd venture out last, sticking to the porch, watching the trees sway like sentinels. But the disturbances escalated. Objects moved, chairs scraped across floors when I wasn't looking. Doors creaked open to reveal footprints in the dust, wet and bare. Once I found a note on the table, scrawled in shaky hand. The road calls, don't resist. Not my writing, I burned it, but the smoke curled into shapes, truck silhouettes dissipating in the air. Dreams merged with waking. I'd be driving VA 83, convoy ahead, horns blaring, then vanishings, wreckages, and I'd wake screaming, only to hear real horns outside. Isolation gnawed, turning thoughts inward. Memories of family surfaced. Wife left years ago, tired of the road life. Kids grown, distant. Was this punishment? For all the miles, the neglect, or just the mountain's way? I tried documenting, journal entries to ground myself. Day 47, horns at midnight, voices clearer. Saw figure in trees, tall, hunched, feral. But pages would go missing, replaced with clippings like those in the abandoned cabin. More stories of lost convoys, patterns undeniable. One article from 1930s, phantom trucks haunt mountain pass. Descriptions matched, echoing horns, ancient wrecks appearing overnight. A storm hit hard one night, wind howling like banshees. Power gone, I lit candles, shadows leaping. Knocks at the door, rhythmic, insistent. I ignore, but they persisted. Finally, I opened it, rain whipping in. No one but on the threshold, a rusted horn from a truck, still warm. I hurled it into the dark, slammed the door. Then inside, laughter, Roy's echoing from the walls. The unexplainable became routine, dread a dull ache. Survival instincts kicked in, barricade doors, stock food. But the emotional grip tightened. Sorrow for the vanished, confusion at my role. Was I witness or participant? The lingering fear, one day I'll step into the night, follow the horns, become an echo. But resistance waned. The calls grew seductive, promising end to loneliness. Join the convoy, they whispered. Safety in numbers. I fought, but how long? Now as I write this, wait, am I writing? The pen moves, but the words fade like mist. The horns swell, closer. Perhaps this is the end, or just another replay. The isolation terrifies. Am I next to fade into the night? Or am I already? My story an echo for the next soul on VA 83. The question hangs unanswered in the Appalachian dark. The words blurred on the page as I sat there, the candle flickering low, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. My hand trembled, the pen slipping from my fingers. Was this real? Or another layer of the nightmare? The horns were louder now, not distant echoes, but a thunderous roar shaking the cabin's foundations. Glass rattled in the windows, and outside the wind carried voices, familiar, pleading. "Harlan, it's time." Jim's drawl, unmistakable. I stood, legs unsteady, and moved to the window. The yard was illuminated by an unnatural glow, like moonlight amplified through fog. There they were, the trucks, lined up in a convoy, engines idling, exhaust curling like breath in the cold air. Big Jim's Freightliner at the front, door open, cab light on. Roy's Peterbilt behind, reefer unit humming. Dale's Mac, flatbed empty, and mine, Kenworth, polished as the day I bought it, waiting at the rear. No rust, no vines, just pristine, as if that night had never happened. My breath fogged the glass. How? I'd sold it, watched the buyer drive away, but here it was, calling me home. The figures inside, shadowy silhouettes, waved, beckoning. Feral eyes gleamed from the tree line, watching, waiting. The isolation crushed me then, a wave of sorrow for what I'd lost. Friends, sanity, self. Confusion swirled. Was this the mountain's curse, replaying disappearances for eternity, or my mind's final break? I opened the door, stepped out. The air was thick, charged. The horns blared in unison, a welcome. I walked toward my rig, hand outstretched. The dread lingered, cold and gripping, but the pull was stronger. Am I next, or was I always? The night swallowed me, echoes fading into...
The odometer clicked onward, each mile a small victory against the night. To shake the unease, I lit a Marlboro, the flame from my Zippo flickering blue, smoke curling lazy toward the vents. The cab filled with the sharp tang, mixing with the pine wafting from the load behind. The fog deepened, transforming the highway into a tunnel of white, my world shrinking to the hood and a few yards of asphalt. I geared down for an incline, the engine laboring with a deep growl, and let my mind wander to the folklore baked into these mountains. Granddaddy was a master storyteller, sitting by the wood stove on winter evenings, his pipe glowing as he wove tales of the lost ones, settlers who strayed from wagon trails, their cries echoing on blustery nights, begging for rescue that never came. Or the Farrell clans, offspring of deserters from the war between the states, or chain gang escapees, gone wild in the rhododendron thickets, surviving on game and raids, their eyes glowing like animals in the dark. "They crave company, boy," he'd rasp, leaning close, breath sweet with tobacco. "Lonely souls, pullin' the livin' to join 'em." As a kid, I'd scoff, but the stories rooted deep, surfacing on nights like this. I recalled a haul a couple years prior through the Monongahela National Forest, pulling over at a turnout for a quick break, bladder full from too much coffee. The woods were silent, unnaturally so, no crickets or owls. As I relieved myself by the trees, branches cracked nearby, heavy footsteps pacing parallel in the undergrowth. I swung my flashlight, beam cutting the dark, revealing nothing but trunks and ferns. But the sensation of eyes on me persisted, hair standing on end, until I scrambled back to Betsy and locked the doors, heart thumping. Rationalized it as a bear or deer, but doubt lingered. Superstition, I chided myself now, same as then. Exhaustion's tricks. I'd started at sunup, eyes gritty from lack of shut-eye. Hallucinations creep in, shadows morphing into figures, the brain stitching fears into reality. Yet, 12 miles later, after navigating a gauntlet of hairpin bends that had me gripping the wheel tight, there he was again, or his spitting image. On the left shoulder now, same faded overalls, same drooping hat, same rigid posture facing north. My breath hitched, a cold fist clenching in my chest. How the hell? This stretch was linear, no turnoffs or trails viable for foot traffic, the landscape hostile with sheer cliffs ascending one side, plummeting drops on the other, guarded by battered rails. No vehicle could have overtaken without me noticing. I decelerated, staring intently, praying it was an optical illusion, perhaps a mile marker or animal. But the fog parted just enough, and there were the details. Patched knees, checkered flannel, boots encrusted with mud that looked wet, fresh. I laid on the air horn, the blast reverberating off the stone walls like thunder in a barrel. He didn't stir, not a muscle. Panic ignited, coiling tight in my gut. I edged by, the trailer inches from clipping him, and in the mirror, that languid head turn, locking on like a predator scenting prey. "Sweet Jesus," I breathed, palms sweaty on the vinyl. Snatching the CB mic, I keyed it hard. "Wit on 19 northbound. Y'all seeing this guy on the shoulder? Overalls, big hat, popped up twice now. No way he beat me here." Only static replied, a mocking hiss. I cycled channels, 9 for emergencies, 17 for chit-chat, nothing but dead air. The mountains, swallowing signals like they swallowed men. Solitude crashed over me, the cab a coffin, the night an abyss. I gunned the accelerator, Betsy surging forward, but the dread trailed like exhaust. Explanations tumbled frantic in my head, each flimsier than the last. A prank? Hill folks in identical get-ups leapfrogging had via hidden paths? But in this pea soup fog on this treacherous ground? Twins or a whole family of lookalikes? Absurd.
Sleep-deprived mirage? Plausible. I'd cut corners on rest for the bonus pay. Or carbon monoxide seeping in. I rolled the window down farther, frigid air blasting in with scents of damp soil and evergreens, sharpening my senses but not dispelling the vision. Memories of Sarah surfaced, her worried face at the door each departure. "You'll encounter something unnatural one day, Harlan," she'd murmur, pressing a cross into my palm. "Promise you'll come home." I hadn't kept that vow. Home was splintered now, reduced to holiday cards and sporadic calls. The ache of it amplified in the vacant seat beside me, a void begging to be filled. The highway constricted, guardrails pocked with scars from avalanches and collisions. I'd witnessed the carnage, twisted steel, emergency lights pulsing, faces pale with shock. The fog enveloped everything now, sightline shrunk to 30 feet, compelling a snail's pace. Then, the next manifestation, right shoulder again, mirroring the initial. My heartbeat thundered, cold sweat trickling down my temples. "This can't be," I whispered, but there he stood, etched in the headlights. No horn this time, I just gawked, creeping past, catching a fleeting view under the brim. Pallid skin, angular jawline, eyes veiled, yet their scrutiny pierced. The mirror showed the pivot. Fear simmered, the gradual kind that undermines reason, leaving you raw. Cell phone next, no bars, scream mocking with emptiness. CB remained mute, utter desolation. Recollections of prior frights surged. A foggy eve near Elkins, halted for a smoke, hearing footfalls shadowing the rig. Flashlight revealed zilch, but the chill endured. Or yarns from comrades. One claimed a passenger who divulged intimate secrets, then evaporated at a curve. At the subsequent emergence, left once more, I frayed, nearer the pavement, as if advancing. I veered, tires growling on the strip. "What are you after?" I bellowed, words rebounding. The mist murmured back, drafts through fissures. I urged Betsy faster, heedless on the slick, but the peaks extended infinite. Reminiscences inundated, boyhood in the glen, gales shrieking like specters, mama invoking over tapers. Myths of resonances, deceased looping finales, ensnaring vitality. Colliers entombed, summoning from sepulchres, motorists adrift in tempests, roaming eternal. "They select kin, boy," he'd intoned. The visions melded, each amplifying strain. Fifth, sixth, identical, that rotation. Perspiration drenched, limbs numbed, cab chilled, exhalation apparent, aura sensed, unseen. Midnight descended, the witching hour as grannies dubbed it, when veils thin and the departed stir. The route plunged into a profound hollow, a basin where ancient trees towered, their trunks gnarled like arthritic hands, branches arching overhead in a macabre vault. The air grew heavier here, laden with the rot of fallen leaves and moss, an earthy musk that infiltrated the vents, despite the heater blasting. The fog was impenetrable now, a living entity that pressed against the glass, tendrils probing for entry. My lights dimmed momentarily, perhaps a voltage dip or something more sinister, then surged back, illuminating him dead center in the lane. Not on the margin this time, but blocking the path, a sentinel of flesh and shadow. Panic exploded, adrenaline flooding my veins like fire. I stomped the brakes, airlines hissing furious, tires locking and skidding on the damp blacktop. Betsy shuddered violently, the trailer swinging sideways in a near jackknife, gravel spraying as the shoulder bit in. The rig halted mere inches from him, the grill almost brushing his overalls. Up close, in the harsh glare of the highs, he was grotesquely wrong. Skin pale as moonlit snow, nearly see-through, blue veins mapping like rivers under parchment, lips chapped and colorless, no vapor from breath in the cold. And the eyes, oh Lord, the eyes beneath that hat brim, reflecting the beams like a cat's, but devoid of spark, bottomless pits sucking in light without return. He lifted a hand, deliberate and unhurried, finger extending not toward me, but beyond, into the cab's interior. Instinct overrode terror. I glanced rearward, neck twisting sharp, and there it was, a nebulous contour in the passenger seat, a translucent duplicate of myself, slumped identical over an invisible wheel, clad in my worn denim shirt, features blurred but unmistakably mine, a spectral echo, mimicking my weary pose, but ethereal, fading at the edges like smoke. The cab's temperature plummeting, my exhalations clouding thick, a frigid burden settling on my shoulder like an unseen palm. Dread consumed me then, the profound sword that strips away pretense, leaving you confronting the void within. Was this death, a harbinger, or something the mountains birthed to claim their due? I wrenched the gear shift, floored the pedal, Betsy roaring as she lurched around him, tires churning dirt on the shoulder, the trailer groaning in protest. He dissolved in the rear view, swallowed by fog, but the apparition beside me endured, a chill companion radiating sorrow and accusation. I drove manic, curves be damned, the rig protesting with squeals and shudders, but I couldn't stop, wouldn't until light pierced the horizon. The hours blurred into a fevered haze, the road an endless serpent coiling through the dark. The shadow lingered, not speaking but present, a weight that tugged at my soul, whispering without words of losses accumulated, the family fractured, the life unlived, the pieces surrendered to these hills. I chain-smoked the Marlboros, ash scattering on my lap, coffee long gone cold in the thermos. The radio stayed silent, CB a lifeless brick, cell signal a joke in these depths. Isolation was absolute, the world reduced to the dash glow in the fog's embrace. Memories assaulted anew, Daddy's accident, the scream of the saw, the blood-soaking sawdust. Mama's funeral last year, cancer eating him quick, her last words urging me to find peace off the road. Ellie's voice on the phone, distant and formal, the gap widening with each missed milestone. And Sarah, her parting kiss tasting of goodbye. The echo seemed to feed on them, growing denser, the cold intensifying until my teeth chattered. Dawn crept gradual over the Pennsylvania border, the sky lightening to gray, fog retreating like a defeated army. I pulled into the first rest area, a concrete oasis with vending machines and bathrooms, Betsy wheezing to a stop. Hands trembling, I killed the ignition, the sudden quiet deafening. A glance to the passenger seat, empty, no trace but a lingering frost on the vinyl, melting slow. I stumbled out, legs rubbery, gulping fresh air tinged with exhaust from other rigs. The sun broke through, warming my face, but the chill inside persisted, a hollow where something vital had been excised. That was 6 months back, but the mountain's grasp endures. I still haul nights, can't quit the rhythm, but every shadow on the shoulder quickens my pulse, every fog bank revives the dread. The echo, it returns sporadic, a cold spot in the cab on lonely stretches, a murmur in the static, reminding me of what stayed behind in that hollow. Part of my spirit, perhaps, trapped in the loop, or a fragment the figure claimed.